Guys, I want to be there for you in your time of grief. Kathy Zhu, has she not suffered enough? Well, now we find out that she's been banned from Twitter. Like, where were you when you first found out that Kathy Zhu been banned from Twitter just because she was DMing and spreading revenge porn and doxing Ashley Ray Goldenberg? But I mean, that's very unfortunate. I have to disavow that kind of behavior. But Kathy, this is you. You're like a candle in the wind. I mean, this is going out for you, Kathy. Kathy, if you can hear me, I am here for you. All right, this is serious. Goodbye, Kathy Zhu. Though I never knew you at all, you had the grace to hold yourself, while all those around you crawled. They crawled out of the woodwork, and they whispered into your brain. They set you on the treadmill. They made you change your name. Kathy Zhu, banned from Twitter today.
A Michigan beauty pageant winner and outspoken supporter of President Trump has her crown revoked. She claims it was over her political views. Kathy Zhu was abruptly stripped of her title of Miss Michigan last week after some past tweets came to the attention of pageant officials. And Kathy Zhu joins us now. Kathy, thanks for being here. So just to get the story straight, the pageant officials said that they found your social media content to be offensive, insensitive, and inappropriate. Do you see why they felt that way?
Honestly, you shouldn't just take tweets out of context. I think it's super important to the full context of the tweet and the full conversation. Everything I've posted was my statistics and opinions, and I think that we should be empowering women's voices and not just stripping them of their title only because of their opinions.
So let's look at some of your posts that I think that they had objections to. So here was one. This was from October 2017. I think it was in reference to some conversation about Black Lives Matter. You wrote, "Did you know the majority of Black deaths are caused by other Blacks? Fix problems within your own community first before blaming others." So do you see how that could be seen as offensive?
This tweet was actually in response to another person talking about how all Blacks or all cops are bad people, that they kill innocent Black people. And I think that you shouldn't just put a blanket statement over all cops. Again, read full tweets and context to make sure to see the full story.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess your point of, did you know the majority of Black deaths are caused by other Blacks? What's your point?
That's statistics, and you can find that on FBI's website. This is all backed up by statistics and facts. I think it's really, really awful how the left thinks that statistics and facts are racist. So I don't think anything I said was remotely wrong. I stand by every tweet that I post.
And do you know who causes the majority of white deaths?
Yeah, this is apparently this is white people cause white deaths. It's not even that's the issue. The issue is that people didn't know that I was responding to another person calling cops bad people.
Right. I guess my point is, why would you focus on Blacks causing Black deaths when the majority of white deaths are caused?
Right. Why would she talk about hate facts? Come on, guys. There are just certain facts that we should be talking about. We should keep quiet about all sorts of facts of life because these facts are hateful and they can cause pain.
Caused by white people. Why? This is why people think that has a ring of racism to it. You didn't mention the white statistic.
Again, this is in response to another person's tweet talking about how cops kill Black people. And this is, I can't just take a tweet and just, turn it around saying, oh, white and white violence too. Of course, everyone has problems with their own communities, and I completely understand that. But, we have to empower women's voices, honestly, to show that, we could have different political opinions and that not just statistics and facts are racist.
Guys, we have to empower women's voices. I think that's what's really important. Okay, here's JF here. He seems to be skeptical of some of Church of Entropies' claims. This is from JF's review of Charles Murray's new book, Human Diversity.
With actual statistical events. Mark Smith says, did you see anything worth of consideration in Church of Entropies' moon preventing water boiling off the Earth theory? No, nothing. listen, Church of Entropy is a delusional woman. It's as simple as this. Too bad. I love her, and she's just delusional. So I would love for her to be right on a single thing, but every time we discuss, it's always there she is in the regular chat. Hi. Look, every time we discuss, it ends up being a mix of crap and stuff that could be possible, but mostly crap. And I'm like, oh god, I have to dismiss the crap. And then there's very little chance that what the rest that she says is true. But I would love for her to take our best theory, our best case. I think that it is the subatomic structure of the atom. And so let's get this. And she says she has a model for this. I want to hear it. But you have to be careful. I'm triggered very easily. If you combine it with a theory of vapor and water and the moon, I'll quickly be rejecting all of it. Clifford Bates sends a super chat. He says, "Will watch tomorrow as I got to sleep to wake up early to teach tomorrow. Do you think the book offers a good introduction to these questions?" It's definitely a good introduction, but it's such a limited case. You need to.
Okay, so what about Nicker Nation Nick's deplatforming and heresy? Let's get some thoughts.
Issue 2, Nicker Nation Next. This past week, Nick Fuentes was expelled from the world's largest video platform, YouTube. Adding insult to injury, it happened on Valentine's Day, already the most painful day of the year for incels. While dissidents of the past circulated handwritten samizdat among comrades, today we use the most popular media platforms and, at least potentially, talk to the world. Whatever you think of Nick Fuentes, his experience is paradigmatic. There is a sword of Damocles hanging over the heads of every dissident, and in 2020, that means every person who expresses white identity, however couched. The panel discusses deplatforming and modern heresy. The latest victim of this ongoing deplatforming, the great shutting, was Nick Fuentes, how do you describe him? Conservative Zoomer commentator. He is someone who does a lot of live streaming. He clearly has an audience. And he was banned for basically doing things that he does on a daily basis. So our friend JF, I think each of us has been on his program at least once. I've been on a dozen times or so. Got into a personal feud with Nick. Nick loves these personal feuds. He's gotten into a personal feud with just about everyone. And JF has posted a video on BitChute showing his channel violations, the TOS violations against YouTube. But I watched that video, and to be honest, I don't like what Nick does. I've never watched a full stream. I've watched clips, and I can't imagine listening to them for an hour. It's crude and shallow, but at the same time, nothing that he did was illegal. Perhaps you could say it was a violation of TOS at some level. You could flag it. I would not do that. And again, what he got banned for was what he was doing for the last 3 years. So it is highly inconsistent. And that inconsistency is a kind of feature, not a bug of the system. When we don't, if they would just simply ban everyone to the right of Jeb Bush, we could then know what the rules were and go onto another platform. But this inconsistency, ambiguity, it creates a overall chilling effect where I can put up a video and say, oh, this is really good. I bet we're going to get 25,000 views. People are going to love it. And also I could think I'm going to upload the same video and my whole channel is going to be taken down and I'll lose all of this investment that I put into the platform. It is really psychologically damaging. So anyway, let's talk first about the Nick situation, and then let's talk about the deplatforming issue on a more theoretical or policy basis. So Keith, why don't you jump in? And you are a certified Zoomer. So why don't you jump in and what are your thoughts on Fuentes and Nicker Nation?
I think technically I'm a millennial actually. Maybe I wish I was a Zoomer, you know, self-hate millennial. But then again, is there any other kind of millennial? But yeah, I'm just on that border. But
As bad as millennials are, Zoomers are kind of worse, from what I can tell. But go ahead.
Yeah, but you see, because you know, if I was a couple of years younger and I was a Zoomer, I'd know optics.
Right. Great optics.
I'm never sure of my optics, just being on that kind of borderline, you know.
Yes.
I could be drifting into bad optics. But in terms of the Fuentes banning, I mean, I don't know if JF is responsible because, like, I know JF said he was flagging his videos. That was surprising because to me, like, I kind of would have just expected that there was like dedicated Antifa flagging all these videos every day anyway. But I mean, even if that was the case that he got banned for that, I mean, you can look at someone like James Allsup. He got banned with no strikes. Red Eyes got banned with no strikes. So many of these examples, Culture Thug, all these people. I mean, Zorius got banned. He didn't even have any political content on his channel. It was just music. Like, that was definitely the most egregious. So it is this. Yeah, it is this problem of YouTube won't make clear what the guidelines are. That's definitely intentional because it does lead to this kind of paranoia and self-policing. And you know, this sense, are they going to put work into building a channel and put work into making videos if they know that at any time they could be given the chop like that? But you know, it's the year of an election, and this isn't really an issue. And you kind of wonder, like,
how are you doing?
Has the right Mr. Trick in not bringing this front and center? Because I don't know, this could so easily be a central election issue. I mean, even if there was a candidate like Andrew Yang that kind of ran a sort of quixotic campaign on tech censorship, and much as Yang was focused on the issue of AI taking jobs, if someone was focused on the power these oligarchs have. But that hasn't happened, and I don't think it's going to be an election in 2020. And you know, Trump made a lot of noise about doing something about this, but I mean, from Trump's perspective, I don't think it's a problem because like these social media giants now, they're not really censoring the likes of, you know, the sort of Republican conservative types. And anytime there was a hearing with Mark Zuckerberg, if someone like Ted Cruz bringing up that, I don't know, an anti-abortion Facebook page was censored or something. And you know, I wouldn't be surprised if they actually did do something about that. Maybe they did pull back their censorship of, you know, the Turning Point USA type stuff. And you know, from Trump's perspective, that is the conservative movement. Like, Trump is promoting Charlie Kirk's latest book on the MAGA movement. Charlie Kirk wrote the MAGA book. So I don't know. I mean, I think no matter who wins in 2020, I don't think anything's going to be done about this. And it's kind of, I think it's going to get to the point where it's just going to be too late. And you know, YouTube is more and more becoming like a Netflix type. I mean, the idea that these are private companies. I mean, I know we've been over all the ridiculous libertarian arguments against this, but like, it is very serious. I mean, anyone that has any pretense of believing in liberalism or liberal democracy, I mean, you know, liberalism. You read someone like Habermas, and you know how important dialogue and like in early liberalism, the coffee houses where liberalism was birthed. If you believed the liberal genealogy of this, and it was these free speech places where people could go and buy their coffee and newspaper and discuss the issues of the day. And we don't really have a public space anymore. I mean, what's the public space? You know, it's a mall or something else consumerism related, and you know, dialogue is almost completely confined to the internet, and then you have you know, algorithms deciding what routes you go on. So I mean, I just think it's the biggest issue of.
And Cassandra Bing. So here's the strategy that Cassandra Banks has been. There's lots of free configuration today because Entropy has a new platform and everything. I'm not sure what was playing, but I muted some sites. It seems to be stabilized. How are you doing, people of the regular chat? I hadn't realized this. I hadn't realized the degree to which these people have switched from porn to right-wing thought. Oh my god, and today there was an explosion due to it all. Kat Izu, the princess of beauty, is gone from Twitter for publishing revenge porn of Cassandra Banks. Everyone in this group, they've all been taking some sort of either participation to beauty pageants or softcore porn or hardcore porn. And they are yelling at each other. They're starting by, haha, don't believe this girl, don't trust this girl, she's been doing porn. And then the other is putting photos and, oh, this girl is doing porn too. And then the other photos are coming and this girl has been involved in hardcore porn. Oh my god, and Cassandra Banks. So here's the strategy that Cassandra Fairbanks has been using. She made Twitter believe that the porn that was shown on Twitter by Banks has been is underage. It's been taken when she was too young. And her claim is that, oh, maybe some of the photos come when I was 19, but maybe some of the photo comes from when I was 17. And everyone is calling bullshit on this, of course. And she also said, it was professional porn, but it's been also used by my ex who was pissed against me, and he keeps republishing them every time on the internet when he wants to hurt me. So it's revenge porn. Wait a minute. When you do professional porn, and it's reused in your future, it's not revenge porn. Revenge porn is something extremely precise. It's when you have private photos of yourself that you did in a loving context for a single person, and this person uses these photos to intimidate you, extort you, or hurt you. it's not revenge porn if your ex happens to be a porn producer and you've signed the consent sheet. What the fuck is happening? And I won't be able to show you all of the images, but I'm going to describe, and I can describe in detail because I don't know if people realize this, but YouTube's rules against nudity keeps me from describing what I see even in words. So I'm going to be extremely limited in what I show. But what we have here is a similar case to the Nick Fuentes case with me. It's the female version. Of course, the male version didn't involve porn photos. But when you get into these cam girls that are because you have to understand the porn industry for a girl, it really sucks because the age at which you will stop being popular is pretty much 23, 24, and your career is pretty much done. And so you need to have something to recycle yourselves into. I don't realize, but right-wing thinking on the Twitter is an outlet for these women so that they can spend the rest of their days combining boobs showing inadvertently and right-wing thinking. So Cassandra Fairbanks published, this morning I woke up and I saw some of this porn. And I was like, Twitter is sending me porn pictures. That's very rare already. And Cathy Zhu was publishing.
Okay, I can't delve into anything too porny. This is a very elevated show. This is all about spirituality and connecting with our higher power. I can't just like dumpster dive into all this porn and revenge porn. That's not who we are, right? That's not part of our spiritual journey, is it? All right, let's check in. What's Mike Bloomberg saying these days?
Black and Latino, enormous cohort of Black and Latino males, aged let's say 16 to 25, that don't have jobs, don't have any prospects, don't know how to find jobs, don't know what their skill sets are, don't know how to behave in the workplace where they have to work collaboratively. Enormous cohort of Black and Latino.
Well, this guy is basically paraphrasing the Steve Saylor line about blacks possessing poorer native judgment than other groups, which has effectively gotten Steve Saylor banned from establishment media. But now this was a talking point for the establishment's favorite candidate, Michael Bloomberg. So, is Bloomberg a Steve Saylor reader? Pretty funny. Some of these old clips from Bloomberg. And what's funny is how conservatives are decrying, like, oh, how racist these things are. Saylor says that Margaret Thatcher is the encoder is the closest thing we have to Margaret Thatcher today. Then we got Boris Johnson aide quit after the single most well-confirmed fact in the history of the social sciences on group differences in IQ. And Saylor tweets, singer James Fire and Rain Taylor's parents were the waspiest wasps ever, particularly like the part about how his dad went to the South Pole on an expedition, was entrusted with the keys to the liquor cabinet, and developed a very serious drinking problem. And James Taylor says that Donald Trump embodies the Confederacy. It's right, nothing says Southerner like good old Donald Trump. And Richard Dawkins tweeted about eugenics yesterday, saying, yeah, of course it works. It works for plants and animals. Of course it works for people, but it's immoral, so we shouldn't use it. And then to do penance, he talked about how he's listening to Angela Saini's dopey science denialist book, Superior. But there is one good part to it. She interviews superstar Harvard geneticist David Reich, and he demolishes her entire book for her. Angela writes, at this same time, David Reich thinks some categories may have more biological meaning to them. Black Americans are mostly West African in ancestry, and white Americans tend to be European, both correlating to genuine population groups that were once separated, at least partially, for 70,000 years in human history. He suggests there may be more than superficial average differences between Black and white Americans, possibly even cognitive and psychological ones, because before they arrived in the United States, these population groups had their 70,000 years apart, during which they adapted to their own different environments, which essentially demolishes Angela Saini's book. Okay, let's Let's get back to JF's commentary here on Kathy Zhu.
Porn pictures of Ashley Ray Gorpenberg. She is a. Oh, do I have a buffering issue here? I'm sending the info at a certain rate. There is an upload problem, and that there is no deluge open or BitTorrent of any kind of bandwidth on the internet. And it may be, but in this case, it is porn. I've been on too many porn sites today. Are you happy Kathy Zhu is gone from Twitter? This will be our question tonight, so join us on Entropy if you want to send super chats. It's my favorite platform for super chat.
Mine too.
Okay, is the problem of the upload speed fixed? It's getting fixed. I see it. The whole story. Cassandra Fairbanks today was dancing on Kathy Zhu's tomb of Twitter. She says, big thanks to the policy communications team at Twitter for taking it seriously when I reached out. I shouldn't have had to escalate this to contacts at the platform, though. The report option for this type of harassment should be taken more seriously. And Frog Girl, who is Ashley Ray Groipenberg, she says, Kathy has lost her mind for approximately the 14th time in the past 2 weeks. Now she's posting underage revenge porn of Cassandra, and what's about to be obviously edited bathing suit photo of me, and people are supposed to believe we're porn stars because of this. Weird. So let's review the contents here and make a judgment, because clearly what's happening is that Cassandra Fairbanks and Ashley Ray Groipenberg are both trying to push the discourse on Twitter that this was underage porn, and that was published by Kathy Zhu, and that it was also revenge porn. So let's review the materials here. And the claim by Ashley is that that this is not porn, that this is a heavily edited bathing suit photo of her. Let's review all of this. I won't be able to show it on the camera.
Okay, let's not. Okay, guys, let's get spiritual.
It's a short.
Are we on camera now?
Are we back?
Oh, we're back.
Oh, we're back.
We're back. Ernie Kurtz, author of the 1979
so
book.
Ernie, you can just pick up
Not God.
where you were.
History of
In
Alcoholics
one way or
Anonymous.
another, I think everyone wants to be part of a larger story and to know that story. It's interesting because in general, on a personal level, we're not necessarily that interested in going back and getting our stories, or are we? Remember, history means story. The story of anything is worth studying because anything that exists, we wonder how it come into being. This is sort of the natural child asks, where did I come from? I think for many alcoholics, they really want to know the story of AA because on some level it is their own story. They recognize that, and to know one's own story, this becomes something very special. It's good to study the oddballs. It's good to study what's not ordinary, what's not every day. And alcoholics are not ordinary, and they're not every day. You know, it's the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. Well, alcoholics are one hell of a squeaky wheel. You pay attention to that which is not aligned properly. And I think that what is basically there's been this long history of finding out what's normal. They're studying the abnormal. This is the origin of psychology, I think. Some branches of psychology. This is. I mean, you got a bunch of freaks here who are making it in society. What the world is going on? Anybody who's ever dealt with an active drunk, anybody's ever been puked on, right, or slipped on somebody else's puke walking down the street. This is one reason that I have very mixed feelings about the idea of destigmatizing alcoholism. One, I don't think it will work, so it doesn't worry me a great deal. But this is the reason that AA works. This is an acceptance that one is an essentially limited, vulnerable human being. And there is something that other people can do naturally and normally that I cannot do. Drink alcohol safely. The acceptance of the identity of I am a fundamentally flawed being, which means that I need other people. That fundamental, which is true of everybody, but the other poor suckers don't recognize it. The alcoholic has the advantage of knowing that, and really knowing it. I think that if there's a need to periodically examine what we think we know, because in general, for most of us as human beings, we think we know more than we actually know, and to whether it be as a hobby or to change of pace, I just periodically I find this useful to pick up something that I think I know and look at it again. There is always a different perspective that can be brought to some particular question. And so if you have a particular hobby horse and you're frustrated because somebody else already looked it up, don't let that intimidate you. AA is not New York. AA is not General Service. AA is not God. AA is in the groups. And what we really do not have, and what I miss more than anything, and what I would be going around preaching if I were able to, let's have more group histories. This story of how AA got started in a particular place. I only know a few stories. I know the story here in Ann Arbor, fascinating story. I know the story of some groups when I in the Boston area, and I think if I were still in a position to teach history and send people out on research expeditions, I would say, find an AA group and find out how it got started. Get to these people who remember when the group started. And so this is not something you can put off to the next generation. This is something we should start working on in the near future. Let's, everyone who's up there in the hall watching this, if you don't know how your home group started, find out and start writing it down. And that's not a suggestion, that's an order. I hope many people are watching the AA History Lovers site online, and the riches that are turned up by people, again, they're amateurs, but they're hobbyists. They really throw themselves into this, and they give it absolutely everything they have. The word amateur comes from, this is someone who gets involved out of love for it, whereas a professional is someone that's paid for what he does. And quite simply, the professional historians in general are occupied, if not in academia, in some kind of business where their task is to do a specific kind of research, and they're good at. AA does not have any professional historians. AA is not going to hire anybody to do any history. But these people who have gotten involved in their study of AA history and making what they learn known just because they love the topic, without them, we would know just a fraction of what we know. If you're not getting paid for what you're doing, you're an amateur. Don't knock it, because this is the best kind of historian to be. You're doing it out of the love for this. Some professionals are also in the field from the love of it, and I think I'd like to count myself within that.
So I'm reading this evangelical Christian commentary on the book of Genesis, chapters 1 to 17 by Victor Hamilton. It's the New International Commentary on the Old Testament, and it just struck me a completely different approach between Jews and Christians to the Bible that they share in common. So here we go. First two chapters of Genesis introduce the paradisical world, the world that is paradise, and the family that inhabits the world. Paradise is a place of blessing, one unsullied by sin. The God-hating snake is absent, a phenomenon that is true again only in the last two chapters of Revelation. The world of Genesis 3 to Revelation 20 is a combat zone between God and the snake. So in my approximate 30 years in Judaism, I just don't recall much conversation about the snake in the book of Genesis, the tempter. So for Christians, the snake represents the devil, who is constantly warring with God. But in Judaism's conception of monotheism, there is no independent power outside of God. So the snake doesn't get much attention. He's just a tempter in a story. There's no concept of a devil. In Judaism, there's a Satan who's like a court prosecutor, but he's not a devil. So the devil is a Christian concept. It's not a Jewish concept. And so there's absolutely no concept in Judaism, in normative Judaism anyway, that the Hebrew Bible is the place of a battle between God and the snake. Right? This is a distinctly Christian interpretation. From a Jewish perspective, it's just unfathomable. How on earth do you see the Bible as a battle between God and the devil? Because from the stricter, Judaism has a much stricter definition of monotheism than Christianity. So from a Jewish perspective, Christianity seems like idolatry, even though the majority Ashkenazi rabbis have ruled that it's not, for various legal reasons that would make life very difficult if we were living and trading with idolaters. But from a Christian perspective, of course, Jews and Judaism look hard-hearted, that they've rejected the Savior that God sent to earth. And from a Jewish perspective, Christianity seems like idolatry. And the Christian perspective of looking at the world as this site of a great battle between God and the devil is just completely incomprehensible to Judaism. There's a much stricter understanding of monotheism. There is no power outside of God in the Jewish perspective, except where it resides with human beings who have freedom of will. But there is no devil. There's no devil going around tempting man into idolatry and lust and fornication and overeating and pride, all the things in Christian writings that the devil tempts humanity to. So the devil doesn't play a role in Judaism. So this is absolutely incomprehensible from a Jewish perspective, but from a Christian perspective, it makes perfect sense. So the God-hating snake is absent in the first 2 chapters of Genesis, a phenomenon. It is true again only in the last 2 chapters of Revelation, for the world of Genesis 3 to Revelation 20 is a combat zone between God and the snake. So you won't find any normal Jewish commentator or rabbi claiming that the world is a combat zone between God and the snake. You go up to any Jew and say, do you believe that the world is a combat zone between God and the snake? And he won't have any idea what you're talking about. It's just incomprehensible. So even though Jews and Christians share the same scripture in the Hebrew Bible, they understand it, interpret it, and discuss it in completely different ways. So let me go back here to Knicker Nation next.
Of our day, really, in a lot of ways, because I think what happens in the next few years could, dictate the direction the internet goes for the next century. But we're not hearing anything that would inspire optimism.
I think we should make it, in the alt-right or dissident right, whatever you guys want to call it. I think we should make it our big issue, if not our only issue.
Yeah.
Because this is where we were. I mean, I can talk about this a little bit just because I have longer experience of this. How old are you again, Keith?
24.
Oh, 24. Okay. So yeah, that's way older than the Zoomer crowd who are 16. Living in a chat room effectively. But I can remember all of these things in the sense that I worked for a brick and mortar publication for a time after I left graduate school in 2007. I worked for the American Conservative, and I went to work at 9 a.m. and left at 5, and we produced a real publication, etc. But basically everything that I have done since then has been digital. I've published a number of books, but even those books, people know about them and will buy them because they know about my digital life. And Silicon Valley was a huge benefit to that, an indispensable component of this.
So Richard Spencer's books, he's talking about books where he writes an essay. Okay, I don't think Richard Spencer has ever authored an entire book, right? His intellectual output, aside from live streams and podcasts, is exceedingly meager. There's no public intellectual with his fame who has produced so little intellectual work.
In the sense of using Stripe, which I used very early. I think I might have used that in 2010 even. PayPal, MailChimp, and then using, hosting is much more, democratized. They don't have the monopolies that Stripe does now. I didn't when I started, but using all of these systems to get the word out, uploading a video to YouTube. I mean, ultimately, we're uploading, gigabits worth of content. They are hosting it. They are delivering it. They are dealing with customer service. It is a massive benefit, as opposed to say our producing VHS tapes and having to mail them out to people or something like that. It's kind of unworkable. And what we're able to do is amazing. And so Silicon Valley was unquestionably helping dissident movements, the alt-right, up until 2016-ish. When I got banned from Twitter in 2016, and then I was allowed back on. They took away my other accounts. They basically said you can just have this one. And in 2017, basically a ton of bricks were falling down on us in the sense of mostly getting banned from payment platforms, getting kicked off bank accounts. I've been kicked off a dozen bank accounts of large and small banks, and they've put us in this digital gulag. We benefited from it. We went into this digital prison and we're like, oh, look how fun it is. Look, the water works. We've got all these utilities. There's a cool big screen TV. My prison is great. Why would I want to get out? But the problem is we're still in that prison and they can clamp down upon us anytime they want. But I don't really know of a way out. If we had full, you are not allowed on the internet. We are going to clamp down on anything you do. That might be better in the sense that we would say, okay, we're going to go back to the 90s. We're publishing newsletters and books and so on. That would at least be clear. But where we are now is this ambiguous state of being in a prison where when you're in a prison, you get treated well. You get 3 square meals a day. You get a little bit of entertainment. You get to go out in the yard and run around a little bit, but you're still in a prison. And that is where we are. And again, in terms of the Nick situation, I mean, I'll just say it. I cannot stand the guy. It's just a bunch of takes that are like racist, Republican, like hateful mainstream screaming at people. I think it's useless, but I really I do have some sympathy for him, and we're all in that same exact situation that he is in. And I think we need to kind of have a little bit of solidarity on this issue and make this the one issue that we can actually all agree on. Whether we want to go, I mean, I don't believe in this, liberal notions of free speech, but just in terms of our very survival, we need to demand our ability to exist on these platforms.
I mean, I did notice a problem as well. Like when Red Eyes got shut down, I mean, Red Eyes had over 300,000 subscribers, which is 4 or 5 times bigger than Fuentes' audience. But there wasn't really a huge backlash because it's gotten to the stage in the dissident right that when someone like Red Eyes gets shut down, people kind of go, well, yeah, we saw that coming, and they might make noise about it for a day, but then they move on. And yeah, I mean, if there was any kind of cohesion, I mean, if there was a sizable, whatever amount of people there is in the dissident right, surely there'd be a sizable enough number to pledge abstention from the 2020 election unless Trump did something about this. And I don't know what difference that would make, but it would be something. And maybe that's the space for dissident movement now, is to sort of kind of quixotically try and meme single issues like that into the public sphere.
The problem is people like Nick Fuentes, and to a far lesser degree, but kind of to a degree of Red Ice, are pushing against the notion of acting like that. I've known Red Ice for a while. I was interviewed by Henrik. I think after I was jailed in Hungary in 2014, this is the first time I found them, and I was listening to some of their content. A lot of it's really wild. Some of it I find interesting, but clearly wrong. The moon landing kind of stuff, historical revisionism, etc. But it was at least interesting. I noticed a distinct trend of theirs of talking about demographics, which is the it's red herring, seemingly pragmatic, but ultimately red herring thing of just playing the optics game.
They're a problematic newspaper because on the one hand, they want to be the newspaper that's the radical right newspaper that's rebellious against the leftist establishment and all this kind of thing, and they will go for that, and they will do sensationalist articles that are about that are pro Brexit or whatever in an extreme way. Then on the other hand, at some point, someone up the hierarchy says, "Oh no, we better jump on this bandwagon of political correctness, otherwise we'll look bad and it might be bad for sales or whatever." And so then you can get the other extreme, almost like they're overcompensating for the perception that they're this right-wing newspaper that you're not allowed to cite on Wikipedia or whatever. They overcompensate by being really, really woke on certain things. So they're a very schizophrenic newspaper in some ways.
Yeah, and again, I don't really need to go on Red Ice at this point, and I don't have anything against them, but I think it's somewhat telling that I'm kind of persona non grata. I mean, whatever. I don't really care.
I would add that people have been saying that they never got a strike. That's not true. They did an interview with me on my book, Race Differences and Ethnocentrism, and they got a strike.
Right. No, and I absolutely support them. But again, at least where we were at a time in the alt-right was we're demanding free speech. We're even demanding speech for Anglin. And, when you play the optics game, you basically destroy all of your leverage. So if we are a truly dissident movement, people call themselves the dissident right as it's this kind of funny way to be more PC or something. But anyway, if you were a real dissident movement, we would say we talk about all sorts of issues, but this is where the rubber hits the road, and we will not vote for you. We will condemn you unless you do something about this. But again, what was the alt-right played the optics game in 2017 and particularly in 2018. I think it's actually lightened up in 2019 and early 2020. But we played that game and we removed all of the leverage we have. So it's about us being American nationalists. We're just conservatives.
Okay, does that make any sense? That I mean, Richard, you took the alt-right, a term that meant fun-loving pranksters, and you associated it with Nazism. And now you think that the alt-right spent too much time worrying about optics. Okay. It doesn't seem to be a lot of introspection yet on Richard's account, and as long as he completely lacks introspection, he's only going to lurch from disaster to disaster.
Why are they calling us Nazis, whatever? And what we did by that was destroy our leverage. I think we should say we are radical. We are saying things that go against the grain.
The alt-right never had any leverage. It was, at its peak, it was a generic term for a right-wing movement that wasn't conservative. That Steve Bannon was willing to embrace it, that he was willing to describe Breitbart as the voice of the alternative right. But people like Richard Spencer have never had leverage, never had power, and so this is just purely delusional here. He's talking about somehow the alt-right destroyed its leverage by worrying about optics. The alt-right and the Richard Spencer crowd has never had leverage.
Grain. We aren't just normal, in the worst sense of that word. But we demand our existence online, and that's how we could play this game. I think it's very hard to play that game at this point.
We demand our existence online. You demand it with what? What exactly? What power? What influence do you have to demand your existence online? You have made it so that people like you are loathed by 98% of Americans, and I'm not taking any stand there whether that is right and good and just. I'm just saying you created that situation where the alt-right for a couple of years was known as a bunch of fun-loving pranksters, and then you destroyed its reputation by deliberately associating it with Nazism, and now you're gonna make demands. I mean, who does this guy think he is? Does this guy think that he runs the world or something?
100 times. I am so mad. I am so fucking mad at these people. They don't do this to fucking me. We're gonna fucking ritualistically fucking works. Little fucking kites. They get ruled by people like me. Little fucking octoroons. My ancestors fucking enslaved those pieces of fucking shit. I rule the fucking world. Those pieces of shit get ruled by people like me. They look up. They have a face like mine, looking down at them. That's how the fucking world works. We are gonna destroy this fucking...
Okay, so 98% of Americans aren't going to respond positively to these kind of sentiments. And that's entirely created by you, Richard. But again, there's just no introspection. And you've gone public saying you don't believe in free speech. You don't want free speech in your ethno-state. So just a crazy tactic when you're this isolated, highly unpopular movement. Then you want to go public with how you do not believe in free speech.
With the movement, such as it is.
Also, I mean, I think it's clearly a ever-present danger to democracy if certain extra-governmental elements, such as trade unions as in the 60s and 70s in the UK, such as the multicultural lobby, whatever, become too powerful. It's clearly a danger to democracy. That's why in England we have the Monopolies and Mergers Commission, because the attitude is that if a company becomes too powerful, has too much monopoly on the market, it's a danger to a democratic free society, and so it has to be broken up. For some reason in Finland, they don't seem to have a Monopolies and Mergers Commission, and so a vast percentage of shops in this country are part of a duopoly of two groups, the S group and the K group. It's vast. Almost all supermarkets you're going to go to, apart from Lidl, and that only came in about 8 years ago. Were either part of it. And this is YouTube and Twitter are sufficiently powerful, and Facebook are sufficiently powerful that they are a danger to democracy.
Clearly.
And so I think there's.
Wow. Okay, Kathy Zhu, like a candle in the wind, now banned from Instagram as well. Kathy, keep your light shining. Don't get discouraged, girl. I prefer to remember you in happier times when you're on CNN.
First of all, the pageant wasn't calling you racist. They were saying insensitive and offensive content. And again, you're the person who focused in on that statistic. That's the statistic that you decided.
Whoa! She focused on a statistic. Can you get any more hateful than that?
To highlight instead of police excessive force, showing those statistics. And so this is what got the attention of pageant.
Ah, those are the statistics we're supposed to focus on, is excessive force by police. So when we look at those statistics, Miss CNN, we see that blacks are less likely to be shot by police than other groups in the United States when you compare number of stops to the number of shootings.
Officials.
You know, that's actually false, because if you read the text through the state director, she actually quoted the tweet that I said and said, is this racist? This is racist, right? I mean, you know, again, this is taken fully out of context. And I think that, you know, if you actually think that statistics and facts are racist, I don't know what to tell you. I think, again,
it's just which ones you highlight. I mean, it's just which ones you highlight.
Oh, which ones you highlight. So there are certain facts that we shouldn't highlight because that's racist. That's the CNN perspective.
You know, you could have said the thing about white people, but let's move on to your next tweet. And that was about Hijab Awareness Day. And so you wrote here, there's a Try a Hijab On booth at my college campus. So you're telling me that it's now just a fashion accessory and not a religious thing? Or are you just trying to get women used to being oppressed under Islam? Again, what would you like to say about that? You don't see how that could be offensive?
Oh,
not at all. They were, you know, I went past the booth.
When is offensive a bad thing? Can you see how that might be offensive? Everything can be offensive. Like, why do we have to kowtow and tone down our language to accommodate the sensitivities of mentally ill people? Why do we have to kowtow to the sensibilities of the easily offended? Why are people ashamed of being so easily triggered?
I was late for class already. They were saying, do you want to put on a hijab, putting it, you know, over me? I said, no, I don't want to. I declined wearing this, you know, garment. I think that, you know, it's really rude, I feel like, to Muslims too, that, you know, to wear their sacred garment on someone who isn't a Muslim themselves. You know, I wouldn't want to put, you know, a Catholic rosary on someone if they aren't Catholic.
Right, but
so
that's
I think,
not what you said. What you said, it wasn't that you felt badly for them, that you weren't Muslim. It's that you said, or are you just trying to get women used to being oppressed under Islam?
Yes.
So the whole point of this questioning is that Kathy Zhu was insensitive, and CNN wants to sensitize her to her insensitivity. And this is the nature of news. This is CNN.
There are so many women in Muslim countries right now who are being stoned to death because they don't want to wear a hijab due to their husband's requirement to do so. And I think that we should be focusing on that way more than the Western things about Muslim, because there's so many bad things happening in Muslim countries because of these women, and these women are being crucified for not wearing a hijab, and I think that's really, really awful.
Okay, that's Kathy Zhu and Happier Times on CNN after she lost her beauty queen.
It's a very good case for anybody, whether you are left wing and you object to the capitalism, whatever element, or whether you're right wing and you're in favour of free speech. That these things should be broken up, or they should be compelled in America to comply to American law on free speech.
I mean, YouTube banned a speech by Rand Paul. I don't know, was it today or yesterday that he made in Congress? It's like, this is just absolutely ridiculous.
And the people like Elizabeth Warren and a couple others who have demonized Mark Zuckerberg in particular and talked about monopolistic practices and so on, have been doing really the worst possible. They have the worst take on this, which is that you're a monopoly, therefore, or you're a monopoly, and we.
Yeah, YouTube banned a speech in the United States Senate by Rand Paul. Banned an excerpt because he said the forbidden name of the whistleblower. So the whistleblower is able to work in a political manner, try to arrange things to the likings of his political proclivities. He's able to manipulate the system, and then big tech will line up to protect his identity to the best that they can. There's only one name that you can say on YouTube, and they automatically take down your stream. Only one name. Who is this sainted person who is so protected that you cannot even say their name or show their picture on YouTube and on Facebook? It's the sainted whistleblower. So he's able to create havoc for other people. He's able to create disruption for other people. He's able to pursue his political agenda. And big tech would do its best to protect him from any kind of blowback. It's outrageous.
Demand that you do more censoring. And I actually kind of get it in the sense of like outright fake news. Just like there are people who, particularly in 2016, who were just putting out clearly incorrect news items and so on. And, the Pope has endorsed Donald Trump. That was a famous one. Or, there's the Pizzagate thing. There are all these things that, are, I kind of get where they're coming from. But their general impulse is you need to censor more people. Or else we're going to go after you as a monopoly. Whereas the only way for this to work for us is something like an opposite approach, which is basically saying you are not just some company. You are using the infrastructure of the government, which is the internet, period. And you are a more than just some company. You are the lifeblood of free speech, and therefore you are a public utility. You can still profit off this in the way that Comcast or an IP provider profits or a telephone company profits. But you actually have to adhere to these regulations.
I would submit that some things. I mean, people have commented on socialist sites. I mean, that socialist site to me comes out when I'm in America, and I can't believe how there's no health service, for example. Yeah. But you can pay waiters sub-minimum wage and expect that's dealt with by voluntary tips. I think these things are outrageous. But certainly,
particularly when you're eating with Ed, who rather be waterboarded than give someone a tip.
I made it clear I don't like tipping. I'm happy for them to just add it to the bill. Add it to the costs. Just add 30% to the cost of the items on the menu.
Yeah, I do basically agree with it. Yeah.
So obvious. It's obvious. Yeah. Anyway, I don't. And tipping. And the thing is, they want you to tip for as well. It's not just like restaurants. They want you to tip cleaners in hotels.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And then you find in Europe then they try and gradually introduce tips so that then they can eventually lower the wages.
That's true.
No, don't tip.
You don't tip certain people.
Oscar Wilde wrote an essay against charity. Don't give to charity because then you're sustaining these people and it's the system that's putting them on the street. Leave them to starve and then let the system's guilt sort of take care of it systematically. So don't tip.
Okay, so what's going on with Bible study on YouTube? Let's have a look here. Got a link here from Melky. He's promoting the stream.
You guys, been like so long. It's 2 weeks. Hi, it's dark. Love it. Hi, Iggy, Angelic, and Derek. Welcome back, guys. Hello. Will there be a Bible quiz at the end of this? I don't know. We could set it up. We'll figure it out. I just want to know how everyone is doing and what have you guys been up to in this weeks. I'll tell you guys what I've been up to. And Brian and I went to the first time, and we visited like a yes quiz. Oh, you guys are really like Jason says, "Hola, how you doing?" Wow, I'm doing great. How are you? So I went to Disneyland because I never went, and it was, I don't know, like we took pictures for the castle. It was, it was fun. But then I was like there was just so many people. And, I like to go, because I've been to New York and stuff. So like, I don't mind it. And I grew up in the city. There were just so many that I was just like, I was over it. So was Brian. So like, we didn't love Disneyland, but it was fun. But also, we went to Cocoa Beach. The weather is cold. And Brian says it's because it's winter, but I think it's quite cold. He says, I learned how to tie a Windsor knot for my brother's wedding. Congrats on 3 years. Thank you so much, Iggy. Windsor knots are difficult. I used to work in men's. I know. Men would ask me to tie, like how to tie a tie or a bow tie. That is even harder. Bow ties. Jason says, So yeah, I went there. We went to Cocoa Beach. I love Florida. I love like tropical. I needed to see the sun. I still don't look tan. I'm pretty pale. But...
Okay. I think that's all I can take.
An excellent idea. There was one person once when I was stopped on the motorway and he was trying to collect the charity. He said, I said, no, I don't want to give to your charity. He said, what charities do you normally give to? I said, I pay income tax. Yeah. What are you talking about? I assume the government is competently spending my money. But no, it's
I think this is literally a scene from Reservoir Dogs that we are.
It was also with the tipping. It was always 10%. The tip was always 10%. And now you have these places in London. About 20 years ago, it was a 12% tip. A 12% voluntary tip will be added to your bill. Yes. So you have to tell them to remove it, and then it became a 12.5% tip, and then a 13% tip. In America now, you're expected to pay a 20% tip.
Yes, when I did these conferences at the Reagan Building, which were really great but very expensive, they would give you the price, and then they would tell you the tip. And it's kind of like, what is that? So that 20% is just built in, and it's non-voluntary.
But it is legally. It is legally voluntary. It's legally voluntary, but you have to cause a load of fuss. Like if you go to these museums, in New
hire
York,
a lawyer or something to not pay a tip. I mean,
they're all free. These museums in New York, but they make out you've got to pay, but they're free. But anyway, look, moving off. I would say certain things should be in a complex society should be under the ownership of that society. One of them is railways. I see no reason. It seems to be perfectly logical that a railway system that spans the whole society should be run by. I think it was crazy that they privatised the railways in the UK. The post that should be privatised. Probably even the telecom system should probably be privatised. And I think that it should be when these kind of institutions have such a monopoly. They should be either compelled to abide by the laws of the society, i.e., you could only be chucked off YouTube if you have to make a police complaint.
Are there any careful thinkers who are live streamers? Because it seems to me that pretty much every live streamer is quite a reckless personality, whether it's Richard Spencer, myself, Ed Dutton, JF Garapi. It just seems that recklessness is almost a requirement to be a live streamer. I'm just trying to think, are there any careful live streamers, or are they all people who love risk and frequently tend to be absolutely reckless? Just seems like recklessness is a defining characteristic of live streamers.
If you've been literally cited in murder or engaged in what...
And Nick did not do that. However kind of, edgy, I think he talked about a car accident with it. So, I mean, however kind of distasteful it is not something that would be illegal in a public space. So it is illegal in a public space for me to go up to someone and start just yelling at them and harassing them and telling them I'm going to kill them and whatever. That is harassment. That is illegal. If you do that on YouTube, if Nick or anyone does that on YouTube, they should be actually at the very least banned or for a time or have that video removed.
Now, who are the most important female live streamers? I can't think of any female live streamers that I watch. Now, I watch actually very few live streams. The only stuff I watch on YouTube are documentaries or academic lectures. Occasionally, we'll take in some live streamers if I might use it on the show, but just trying to think, are there any female live streamers, intellectuals who are worth checking out? I just can't think of any. Who are the must-watch YouTube or Twitch live streamers who are female?
But what he did was simply did not rise to that level. It might have risen perhaps to a TOS level, but the fact is the terms of service are no one reads them. They're inherently ambiguous. They can be enforced at the whim of a middle management administrator. It's not workable. And just the simple solution is to say what you can legally do on a public sidewalk, you should be able to do online.
So I had this video. The first time I got a strike was a warning, was I did a video that was a critique of this ludicrous book by Angela Saini, this book Inferior, which all I did was start off by doing an impression of her, which I think is perfectly reasonable. She's a public figure. Why the hell shouldn't I do an impression of her? I did an impression of her, and then I just went in tremendous detail about everything that was wrong with her book, and then I wrapped up in actually quite a nice way. But this groupie of hers, called Jess Wade, who's a Jewish physicist or something at Imperial College London, and is really was a lover, really loves this Angela Saini woman, a real kind of worshipper of her, wears a T-shirt on her Twitter picture with the name of Saini's book on it. And she just got really, she tweeted, "This is disgusting." When someone uses the word disgusting, you know there's something going on. This is disgusting. How could this be? She said, this is hate speech. It's literally inciting hate. She said she said it should be illegal. This video and all this, and pressured YouTube to take it down, and they did. And videos that were far more edgy than that, like one where I did an impression of a Somali sort of sheik, or far more edgy, stayed up. And that video was monetized by manual review.
Okay, his mama
when I came in
JF.
this morning at about 10:30, I saw those graffitis. I said, again, graffitis. Actually, I didn't know what it was about. And it's always frustrating. Got to paint over again. I looked up the name, and I saw that he wants to make ethno-states, GFGP, and he's from the province of Quebec. Never heard of him. And from what I've read, some of it on Wikipedia, I didn't quite agree with them. It looks like a male, but I have a feeling it's a female, especially it's written in pink. And well, especially looking at the camera at the front of the building, the writing, the person completed the graffiti, wasn't happy about it because he left and came back and put a heart. Maybe they didn't want people to think it was anything, not extreme, but not as bad as the message.
Scary. Oh my. Oh no. Oh no. Heavens. Heavens. Worrisome. Absolutely deplorable. Absolutely.
Angela Saini video, before they took it down, it was flagged as being a bit dodgy because it had the word race in it or something, and then it was monetized after manual review, supposedly. And I said to YouTube, I don't understand this. You're saying that it's okay to have advertising, it's suitable for advertising, but it's hate speech. How can it be both? And the bimbo that I was corresponding with, or the person that worked with them, said, oh, the community guidelines rules are different from the monetization rules. And I was like, yes, but you're saying that under your rules, something can be okay for advertisers to want to advertise on it, but also be hate speech. It's insane.
I had a shitposting page on Facebook a few years ago that was shut down 4 different times and then reinstated 4 different times on appeal. So like, it's a really like Kafkaesque reality where you don't know who's making the decision, you don't know what the guidelines are, you don't know why it's been reinstated, you don't know if it's going to be gone again, and it's just this constant sort of paranoia and nervousness.
I had a video that they demonetized, that they flagged. I appealed. They said the appeal is rejected. We're going to demonetize your video. And then a month later, it was monetized.
The other thing is that it's permanent, and I actually think this is so much worse than crimes that you might commit in the physical world. So if I go steal a car and I get caught for it, I have a trial and that is public and that is explicit. I can serve a jail sentence with good behavior. I could lessen that jail sentence. And then afterwards, I might be kind of haunted by this crime for the rest of my life, but I can live as a citizen. I can vote, I can hold a job, I can do whatever. You get banned from social media. I have not, I don't, this is apparently a lifetime ban. I mean, there's nothing you can really do to get back outside of pulling a full Christian picciolini and in Christian's case, just lying and kissing ass and so on, and just totally apologizing and going in the total reverse way. But I couldn't do a video. Let's say I was a little bit tipsy or angry or whatever, and I did something that was stupid. I would simply be banned for life for that one little instance. Whereas you are not just removed from society if you steal a car, or do drunk driving or whatever. You have to murder someone in cold blood in order to be removed from the world. But that's what hate speech is. It's like murder, effectively.
Yeah, but it's true. But that's true. You've got to think about it in an historical context. What we're dealing with is a replacement religion. What we're dealing with, to a certain extent, is Christianity, is the second religiousness that Spengler talks about, which is that it takes aspects of the first religiousness and sort of revives them in some mutated form. And the worst thing is that with this, it takes away the God, it takes away the moral God that's telling you to act in this moral way and not in this moral way. And it creates this kind of moral realism where you worship certain concepts, and you're either in the group or you're not in the group, and you will know implicitly that something's hate speech or it's not. That's why they don't need to define what hate speech is, because it's a marker of group membership. A Christian fundamentalist, Pentecostals will talk about, I think the Holy Spirit is not with him. And it's a phrase I've heard used in my fieldwork. And it's just something they know. They implicitly know that person's not really a Christian. He's not really one of us. He's just doing it to get status or whatever. Be careful of him. The Holy Spirit is not with him. It's nothing that you can articulate why. It's just an instinct. And
when I visit fundamentalist Christian sects, they hand me a snake. They're like, this guy, one of us. I've never experienced what you've experienced.
Okay, here's journalist Michael Tracy on...
Michael Tracy is an independent journalist, meaning he thinks for himself, unlike most journalists. We're happy to have him join us tonight. Michael, thanks so much for coming on. So take 3 steps back, which I know you do for a living, and tell us what the Bloomberg campaign means for the country.
Well, here's an interesting way to look at it. In just the past few years, Mike Bloomberg has gone out in public and stated that he couldn't win the presidency, so he wouldn't even bother trying. And that was the characterization of his vision of his presidential fortunes in just the past few years. Because what is his actual governing agenda? Well, it amounts to a kind of hyper-corporatized, smug, surveillance state cultural liberalism for which there is absolutely no constituency on a mass scale in the national electorate. So Bloomberg rightly surmised...
May I stop you? May I stop you there? I just want to be absolutely clear on that point. You've looked at the numbers, and there is no constituency for the kind of politics of the Google board of directors. Like, most people don't want that.
Shocking, right? Bloomberg rightly surmised that he was not going to go and ever win the presidency on the strength of his political convictions because they're completely ugly and despicable and alien too much of the country. So what has he done? He's had this vociferous focus purely on bashing Donald Trump, because there is a constituency for that. Whatever kind of behemoth data analytics and polling team that he's assembled correctly relayed to him that among older paranoid liberals and some independents, there is widespread just petrification that Donald Trump could win a second term. So rather than campaigning or even presenting himself to the media or doing anything resembling what the ordinary course of action here would be for a presidential candidate, rather than doing any of that, he's just putting together these sleek kind of cutesy ads going after Trump, saying, hey, you know what? I got billions. I've spent 400 million plus so far, but that's just chump change for me. That's basically what my wealth appreciates to on a given week or something. I don't know what the interest increase is there exactly. But he's saying, look, I can go after Trump on these petty characterological issues, as if people are confused as to what Trump's personal idiosyncrasies are at this point. But there is a constituency out there for that who look at the Democratic field and say, oh my goodness, I'm not interested in these internecine debates among the Democrats. I was just in New Hampshire leading up to the primary, and I would talk to a lot of just standard Democrats who did not care about the differences between a Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren or a Joe Biden. They just desperately wanted to beat Trump. And Bloomberg recognizes that. He's saying, look, I'm uniquely equipped to beat Trump. I'm going to flood your daily consciousness with these tedious ads that are been market tested to press your emotional buttons. And that's what he's doing. It's paying off. Like you suggested, this is the most brazen oligarchic intervention in the history of American electoral politics, and it's not even close. It's hugely disturbing, and whether on the right or left, anywhere in between, you should be incredibly alarmed at what's going on here.
And yet, you're one of the only people on the internet saying this, which tells you how fully corporatized our media has become. Michael Tracy, I hope you will come back on this topic. It's good to see you tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tucker.
Good evening and welcome to a special edition of Tucker Carlson Tonight. According to new numbers over the weekend, the Democratic primary race is constricting to become really a two-man contest. A lot of people still in the race, but the outline of the future is getting clearer. So on one side, you have a candidate, Bernie Sanders, who wants to turn this country into a comprehensive welfare state. He plans to upend every aspect of American life in order to impose a new economic order. Now, Sanders isn't hiding what he plans to do. He's running on what he plans to do. His main rival is Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York. Bloomberg has shot to above 15% nationally in the polls, from nowhere, essentially. He's suddenly leading the race in the critical Super Tuesday state of Florida. So what is Mike Bloomberg running on? That's a trick question, actually. Bloomberg isn't running on anything. Not because he doesn't have ideas. He's got plenty of ideas, and some of them are far outside the American mainstream. But Bloomberg doesn't think any of that matters. He's not running on ideas. He's not trying to convince voters of anything. He's not making arguments or working to change their minds on policies they care about. He's trying to buy them, and hence the presidency. It's the single most cynical political campaign ever run in this country. Bloomberg is trying to subvert our democracy with cash, and he's going all in to do it. According to the latest numbers, Bloomberg has spent more than $417 million on advertising so far in this race. His nearest rival, Bernie Sanders, has spent $40 million. That's less than a tenth. Joe Biden, the man they told us was the frontrunner, has spent just $12.3 million. Compare that, let's say it again, to the at least $417 million Bloomberg has pumped into the race just on advertising. And that's just the beginning. Aides say Bloomberg is willing to spend $2 billion of his own money by election day, and the number could go higher. Nothing like this has ever happened in America. Bloomberg's spending is like, and pick your metaphor here, a tsunami breaking over our political system. When the waters recede, there's nothing left. It's been flattened and wiped clean by the weight of Mike Bloomberg's wealth. Bloomberg is the tallest figure on the landscape, the only one left upright. That's his plan. He's all but admitted that's his plan. Watch him here disavow stop and frisk, the single most successful policy he had as mayor of New York.
I defended it, looking back, for too long, because I didn't understand then the unintended pain it was causing to young black and brown families and their kids. I heard their pain, their confusion, and their anger, and I've learned from them, and I've grown from them.
So think about what you just saw. It's not the normal pandering. Mike Bloomberg believes passionately in gun control. It's his life's mission. It's his signature issue. Stop and frisk may have been the most effective gun control policy ever administered anywhere. It took thousands of illegal firearms off the streets of New York. But Democratic primary voters have decided they don't like it. They're against stop and frisk. So without even pausing, Bloomberg grovels, as you just saw, and attacks his own legacy. Why do you do that? Because he doesn't care. Whatever. They're only words. He'll do whatever it takes. Now, they say politicians are ethically flexible, and of course they are. But this is different. There's something ominous about it. Bloomberg can seamlessly change his core beliefs because he doesn't think his beliefs are relevant to the outcome of this race. Only his wealth matters. And the horrifying fact is he may be right. How wealthy is Michael Bloomberg? Well, for context, the richest of the fabled Russian oligarchs, Leonid Mikhelson, is worth about $24 billion. Michael Bloomberg could literally give away twice that amount, or spend it on a presidential race if he wanted, and still be 5 times as rich as Donald Trump is. It's hard to imagine just how much money that is. But with that money, Bloomberg can suffocate all opposition and seize power. A ruling class, which worships money above all, sees nothing wrong with this. They're eager to help Bloomberg do it. Like Bloomberg, they're religiously libertarian on economic matters. That's a position that's shared by only a tiny percentage of the population. No normal person in this country thinks the widening wealth gap is a good thing. It's so obviously making America unstable. But Mike Bloomberg has been one of its chief beneficiaries. He will defend the current system above all else. There's a reason he's the favorite of finance moguls and tech commissars. Again, this is a total departure from anything we have seen before in the history of this country. Say what you will about Donald Trump, but in 2016, he ran for president on ideas that large numbers of voters actually liked, whether or not they liked him. Secure the border, end counterproductive wars, fight the fascism of political correctness. In selling those ideas, he spent about half what Hillary Clinton spent. But Bloomberg can't be bothered with selling ideas or with a platform. He doesn't care what the public thinks. That's why. He believes he can win by overwhelming voters with his money. This is the nightmare scenario that campaign finance reform activists used to tell us about. They were right about one thing. Our system has been vulnerable to people like Michael Bloomberg for a long time. He's just the first one who's actually tried to do it.
All right, let's look. I think they're on Fox yet.
No, I'm not saying they've said the Holy Spirit is not with me. I've said they've commented.
Well, maybe it's because I'm speaking in tongues.
Yeah, you're speaking in tongues and you're handling a rattlesnake. So they kind of you're kind of indicating your. I was at a snake handling church in a place called Lafayette, Tennessee. We went down there. I have a 22-year-old father of 5, Andrew Hamlin, who ran. I think I told you the story, haven't I? And there was this. There was this. We wanted to go to a place called Jolo, West Virginia, to the snake handling church there, but we couldn't because shortly before we were about to go there, the pastor was bitten to death by snakes. And then, so I had to go. I guess. Rearrangement in my itinerary, so we didn't go to West Virginia really at all. We went down to this place in Lafayette, Tennessee, middle of the countryside, past trailer parks, Confederate flags in the windows, things like this. And I said to this Andrew Hamlin guy, "Did you know this guy? I can't remember his name was who died in Jolo?" And he goes, "Yeah, he was my best friend." And then I said, "Are there any rules here?" And he said, "We only ask you stay off the hardwood." And my friend, who's from New York, he went and sat at the back. Little pussy, and I said, "Come on, right, I'm up for doing this. If the Holy Spirit inspires me, I'm up for doing this."
Yeah,
and yeah, it would be interesting. But no, the only person that handled the snakes was this Andrew Hamlin guy. He'd been bitten twice. He'd lost the use of a finger on one hand, and he'd also been bitten on the back of the head. And he said it was because when he handled the snakes, he wasn't quite sure that it was God's will.
Right.
And then of course he was bitten. So
no, I'm imagining some fantastical image of like let the Holy Spirit be with you. We got to support Israel and their just crusade against the Persian terrorists. Oh God, Jesus, these snakes. Ah. That would
be yes. Maybe both Trump and Bloomberg have to handle snakes in the debate.
We might ironically get banned for this. But I'm not wishing the death on anyone. That was a comedic sketch.
But anyway, the point is, we're dealing with a religious group. You implicitly know, you just know how to behave, or you don't. And so the hate speech are a marker that you don't know how to behave. You're not part of their group. You're not part of the religion, and they want you out. It was interesting. This chap out in Rutherford, who's
the Democratic primary race is shaping up. It's a pretty clear choice, really, for Democratic voters. On the one hand, they can get a self-described Democratic socialist who wants to make your health insurance illegal, or they can go with the plutocrat rich enough to buy your hometown. That's the choice. We'll have more to tell you about the Democratic Civil War now in progress in just a moment. But first tonight, there are serious long-term problems facing America, as we've told you about for years on this show. Thanks to outsourcing, this country no longer has the same reserve of stable middle-class manufacturing jobs we did even 30 years ago. In coastal cities, housing has become astronomically expensive. Prices are rising far quicker than wage growth. And most tragically, an opioid epidemic kills tens of thousands of Americans every year. One of the chief reasons for that is a synthetic opioid called fentanyl is smuggled in from abroad. Now, these might seem like unrelated problems, but they're not. A single theme unites them. A systematic decision by many of our country's most powerful leaders to sell out America to China. Those jobs that were outsourced, they went to China. Those rising home prices, all cash Chinese buyers are a major contributor to that, though it's almost never said out loud. Fentanyl, made in China, with the knowledge and tacit approval of the Chinese Communist Party. China is no longer simply an economic rival to the United States. It's becoming a dangerous enemy. But instead of protecting us from this threat, an existential one, our leadership class collaborates with the other side. Why do they do that? Simple, they're getting rich from it. This only became clear to many people a few months ago when the most American of all sports, professional basketball, a game literally invented in a gym in Springfield, Massachusetts, ripped off the mask and showed the world who really controls the league. NBA General Manager Daryl Morey, you'll remember, wrote a tweet supporting pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. In the resulting backlash, the NBA and Morey both apologized for daring to criticize China's fascist regime. And then LeBron James weighed in and explained to us that actually freedom of speech in America is vastly overrated.
So many people could have been harmed, not only financially, but physically, emotionally, spiritually. So just be careful what we tweet and we say and what we do, even though, yes, we do have freedom of speech, but there can be a lot of negative that comes with that, too.
Just be careful with what you tweet or say, because the Chinese are watching and they pay the bills. Golden State Warriors coach Steve Kerr, meanwhile, explained that there's really no moral difference between America and communist China.
It has not come up in terms of people asking me about it, people discussing it. No. Nor has our record of human rights abuses come up either. People in China didn't ask me about, people owning AR-15s and mowing each other down in a mall.
Yeah, so America has school shootings. China is on its third or fourth genocide since World War II. Tomato, tomato. 6 dozen 1, whatever. Yeah. Saying something out like that out loud should be shocking, but it's not really. It's a taste of just how completely the people in charge identify with China over this country. In some cases, they've literally joined China's payroll. Former Illinois Senator Mark Kirk, for example, is a registered foreign agent who lobbies for the China-U.S. Exchange Foundation. That's a Chinese organization with ties to the Communist Party, a former senator. Former Senator Joe Lieberman works for another Chinese company, ZTE. What's ZTE? Well, ZTE is so dangerous to American interests that last August, the president signed a bill banning the federal government from using that company's equipment because it's too threatening. But he's lobbying for him. Former Congressman Rick Boucher, meanwhile, has lobbied for a whole list of Chinese companies, including Hikvision, Huawei, and the search engine Baidu. But China isn't content buying off our retired lawmakers. They're also targeting people who have jobs that matter right now. Last night on this program, we told you about a man called Yu Meng. He's the chief investment officer at California's massive state-run pension fund called CalPERS. Meng, who was born in China and moved here at the age of 25, previously ran China's $3 trillion portfolio of foreign investments. CalPERS has long engaged in shareholder activism to advance left-wing causes in this country, like gun control, and been very aggressive about it. But now the fund also supports China's efforts to eclipse America. CalPERS invests in companies that supply the Chinese military, literally. It also invests in Hikvision, which makes the surveillance equipment that China uses to monitor ethnic minorities like the Uyghurs. So they're actively abetting fascism. There's nothing harmless about these investments. As Yu Meng himself once noted, quote, "Of course it empowers the Chinese regime to have the money flowing in," end quote. Of course it does, but they did it anyway. When Meng worked for China's investment fund, he was recruited by the 1,000 Talents Initiative. That's a Chinese program designed to encourage foreign businessmen, scientists, and other experts to work on China's behalf, often secretly. The explicit goal is to obtain Western technology and research for China's own use, so they can surpass us, which they are. Last month, Harvard chemistry professor Charles Lieber, the head of the department, was arrested for hiding his work on behalf of China. In effect, Lieber was working as a spy. But his case isn't special. The entire sleazy academic world, and it's one of the sleaziest, is addicted to Chinese money. Harvard and Yale both stand accused of hiding hundreds of millions in donations from payments from foreign countries. Needless to say, China is one of the top contributors. Recently, the Texas A&M University system tried to gauge how many of its faculty were getting Chinese money. More than 100 of them had been recruited, it turns out, but only 5 had reported their work for a hostile foreign government. How many were indicted? You guess. Oh, yeah, 0. Now, Chinese officials aren't paying these academics because they love scholarship. No. America's universities are key centers of scientific research and technical innovation. China would like to steal that information, and they are. As of tonight, the FBI is investigating more than 1,000 cases in which they believe China has stolen research from American firms. If anything, our top colleges and universities are encouraging this to happen. And you can see it by the way they recruit. Chinese grad students fill our research labs. This makes college administrators much richer, but it also allows the Chinese government easy access to critical information, some of it that directly bears on our national security. American academics have made it clear whose side they're on. Last November, officials at the University of Missouri, Kansas City removed an artistic display supporting protesters in Hong Kong because Chinese students complained. According to the New Republic, Columbia University's Global Center in Beijing canceled talks because they might upset Chinese officials. They're squelching free speech at the direction of communist China. And that's common in the business world. Disney changed its Tibetan character in one of its movies into a European woman because acknowledging Tibet's existence would anger their masters in China. They should be ashamed. Gap apologized for selling a T-shirt in Canada that didn't feature Taiwan as part of China. By the way, it's not part of China, but China demanded that Gap pretend it is, and they complied. We could go on. There are endless examples of this kind of thing. It's happening all around us. So how about Michael Bloomberg? He's running for president. Maybe more than anyone in America, Bloomberg represents the beliefs and values of our current aristocracy, which is by far the worst in American history, the stupidest, the most greedy. Not surprisingly, Bloomberg has both kowtowed to the Chinese and gotten rich from the Chinese. He's not embarrassed by it. In 2014, Bloomberg explained that actually, China's unelected leader isn't really a dictator.
The Communist Party wants to stay in power in China, and they listen to the public. When the public says, I can't breathe the air, Xi Jinping is not a dictator. He has to satisfy his constituents, or he's not going to survive.
He's not a dictator?
No, he has a constituency to answer to.
So the Chinese dictator is not a dictator. It makes you wonder how Michael Bloomberg would govern as president, or maybe it explains how he'd govern as president. But Bloomberg's personal admiration for the bloodthirsty fossil in charge of the world's largest communist country isn't the only reason he likes China. There's big money at stake, of course. That's always what it's about. Bloomberg's company has enormous investments in the country, and that has influenced how Bloomberg News reports on China. In 2013, for example, Bloomberg News was accused of killing stories that would have revealed corruption by family members of the Chinese dictator. And yes, he is a dictator. Ben Richardson, Bloomberg's Asia editor, later said he'd been told directly by leaders at his company that covering the Chinese Politburo was off limits. That's like telling a Washington bureau chief you can't cover Congress because you might insult them. That's Michael Bloomberg's position. Just today, former Bloomberg reporter Lita Hong Fincher wrote in The Intercept about how Bloomberg's lawyers threatened to destroy her life if she wouldn't sign a non-disclosure agreement about the company's censorship practices. But don't take their word for it. A few years ago, Bloomberg openly admitted that he let China censor his company's news. He actually said that on television. Here it is.
Over the past year, there's been questions about the journalism going on in China and whether the company, in its effort to grow, has muzzled.
In China, they have rules about what you can publish. We follow those rules. If you don't follow the rules, you're not in the country. We write the stories that we think are interesting, and we distribute them where they are allowed to be distributed.
Where they're allowed to be distributed. The scariest part is that as China has grown more powerful, America has grown more dependent on it. Outsourcing our manufacturing power brought American companies big short-term profits. Head to Florida and you'll see the houses they built with those profits. But in the long run, that decision made this country dangerously dependent on a nation that seeks to displace us on the world stage. Consider just one small sector of the American economy, medical supplies. China is now a top producer of antibiotics, surgical tools, prescription drug ingredients, face masks, and many more essential products that you need to stay alive. 80% of our antibiotics right now come from China. Hard to believe, but true. The coronavirus panic alone was enough to cause shortages of some of these materials. What'll happen if an even bigger crisis comes along, as it inevitably will? Or what if China simply cuts off exports as a show of force? That could happen. Maybe they invade Taiwan and then cut off exports. How do we respond? We'd be helpless. The saddest and most infuriating part is that none of this needed to happen in the first place. China didn't just one day magically overtake us. Our leaders made that possible. They abetted it. They profited from it. They betrayed us. Gordon Chang is the author of The Coming Collapse of China, and he joins us tonight. Gordon, thanks so much for coming on. Why has this you've been calling attention to this for some number of years. This is one of the biggest stories in our lifetime, and it has received next to no coverage in the American media. Why is that?
I think it's because American elites wanted to integrate China into the international system. And that sounded very good to the ear, you know, cooperation, friendly ties, all the rest of it. And while they did that, they outsourced American manufacturing. That, as you pointed out, led to the loss of jobs, loss of hope among many people. That was the fentanyl crisis. And so I think that essentially the elites in the U.S. saw themselves having more in common with the elites in China than they did with their fellow Americans. And also, Tucker, they in America were content to accept this notion of inevitable Chinese dominance. And so they were trying to manage America's decline. All of that was absolutely 100% wrong from so many different perspectives.
Wouldn't it have been nice if the public had known this was going on? I mean, this is supposed to be a democracy, and if you're going to sell out our country, shouldn't we know about it?
Yeah, well, certainly we should. You know, when you start to look about this, you know, you have not only Bloomberg with a control of a media empire, but many others. And they enforced this message because it was a message that we wanted to hear. You know, Tucker, we talk about the Chinese deceiving us. And yes, they do deceive us. But more important, there's an issue of American self-deception. Like, we wanted to be deceived because certain people wanted to make money. This is the real issue. It's not a China issue so much. It's an American issue. It's American elites.
How hard will it be to pull back sufficient to regain our independence? I mean, we're dependent on China for critical goods that we need to survive. Is there any effort to retool American factories to kind of bring us back to a place where we're not dependent on a country that hates us?
Yeah, one of the first things the Trump administration did in 2017 was to look at this issue of the vulnerability of American supply chains, about how goods got to the U.S. and what we could do about it. And, you know, when you think about a number of things that the Trump administration has done, from the Section 301 tariffs to other things, these were really intended to disengage the U.S. from China, to reduce that vulnerability. And, you know, it's not just antibiotics, which is a critical item, but so many others when you go down the line. And we're going to see that in this coronavirus epidemic, because if this continues longer than most people think, and I think it will continue for quite some time, we're going to be starting to run out of some items here, some critical items, some everyday items, and we're going to show how foolish it was to outsource American industry to a country that abhors us.
This is a massive national security problem that has received not enough attention. Gordon, thanks so much for everything you've done. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.
Now, the Chinese coronavirus is still raging across parts of Asia. It's killed almost 2,000 people as of tonight. Those are, again, the official numbers. It continues to infect thousands every day. Most experts believe the virus originally evolved in China's bat population and then spread from there to humans from Wuhan's so-called wet market. But some people, and this includes a few actual experts on the subject, are considering another possibility, that the coronavirus was made in a lab in Wuhan. You've probably seen that on the internet. Is it true? How plausible is this theory? Worth getting to the bottom of. Bill Gertz is a national security correspondent for the Washington Times. He joins us tonight. Bill, thanks so much for coming on.
Sure, now, good to be on.
The last thing we'd ever want to do, of course, is endorse untrue information, particularly of this nature. But there's been enough written on this that it seems like it's worth assessing with someone who knows more. What do you make of this claim?
Well, first off, we don't know the origin of the virus. That's a fact. And anybody that says they know what it was the origin or was not the origin is either ill-informed or dishonest. And in the case of the Chinese government, you can imagine which of those options. But clearly, there are signs, there are indications that it came from a bat and then to some intermediary animal, civet cat or pangolin, and then to humans. And the Chinese government has blocked the Centers for Disease Control from sending experts there. And the U.S. has some of the best virus experts in the world. We've suggested, the government has suggested 13 experts to go, and China has said no. So what are they hiding? Those are the questions. So there's a debate now. Is it human cause or laboratory cause, or is it a natural phenomenon? And I think it's important that we write about this, because this is what the role of a free press is, to report on these kinds of things, and let's get the debate going and let's get to the bottom of it.
Is there any evidence as of tonight that this virus originated in a lab?
Well, I don't know. We don't know that they were. We know that here's another fact. The Wuhan Institute of Virology has the only P4 lab, that is for pathogen 4. It's the most secure lab you can have. There's only one in China that's declared, and it's in Wuhan, and it's like 20 miles from this market. That's a fact. The second fact, in January, the end of January, the British medical journal, The Lancet, published a Chinese government-funded study by 29 Chinese scientists, which said that the very first person to get this disease, to come down with this disease on December 1st, had no relationship to the seafood market or the wet market. So those are facts that, again, raise a whole bunch of questions about what is the origin of this. On top of that, the White House just last week ordered the National Academy of Sciences to conduct a study. They say, hey, look, we got to find out the origin is. So they want to know what the origin is, too.
So, I mean, I think the headline of this conversation, which I appreciate your sober analysis, is that we don't actually know. And anyone pretending that he or she knows is lying. Well, so thank you very much for that. Bill Gertz.
Sure. Thank you.
Great to see you tonight. Thanks. Well, Bernie Sanders has been boosted by an unlikely foe, a billionaire oligarch trying to buy the presidency. It's essentially a civil war in the Democratic Party tonight, and the question is who will win. That's next.
Okay, let's have a look here at what's going on Twitter.
Man, that white person come down Sherman. He won. Beat it, kid. Bitch. That's what you are. Hey, look. They beating up every white person.
Wow. Right, looking also at Twitter, the U.S. District Judge Carlos Murguia has resigned amid renewed attention to sex harassment allegations. His sister is the head of La Raza, means the race, but he's resigning now. Sex harassment. Okay, let's have a look at the chat. Over the next 10 years, a girl's going to get sluttier or more modest. Question. Okay, so why do we hear about secular economic trends? Why do they use the word secular? So Bernard says secular from the Latin secularius, relating to an age or a period. So it's a fundamental change. So it's secular when it's used in economic sense. It means a major shift like Netflix and the shift towards streaming, or Microsoft and the shift towards the cloud. Eric Stryker's talking about Christopher Caldwell's new book on civil rights. Stryker is going to debate Destiny live stream. Michael Bloomberg doesn't think dumb people should govern themselves. Just look at his laws against large sodas. Chinese companies should not have access to U.S. capital markets. Well, they're our biggest world competitor, our biggest rival. Jason Unruh made a response video to Slavoj Žižek because Žižek was apparently counter-signaling third worldist Maoist political theory. As long as China has U.S.-listed companies that are investable by pension funds, Tucker Carlson can't complain. Change the law. Leftist German YouTuber 3 Arrows did a response video to Black Pigeon Speaks, saying that Black Pigeon Speaks is essentially just peddling pessimism porn for the alt-right. Ryan Dawson says he gets very little sleep because David Duke keeps calling him on Skype pretty much every night. Dawson says he finds it annoying because it's late at night and he has a kid. Fuentes is going to be on Ryan Dawson's stream this Thursday. Michael Bloomberg is wholly devoid of principles. He only has a will to power. Bloomberg has never faced Democratic primary voters. Bypass them to run as a Republican mayor of New York City. Think about how easy it is to be the pretty non-white MAGA girl and how stupid you have to be to screw that gig up. Relating to Kathy Zhu, who's gotten banned from Twitter and Instagram for sharing or promoting revenge porn. Kathy's termination is comic. So funny that an old white guy, Michael Bloomberg, is buying the Democratic primary. Second term elections, which is the one in 2020, are referendums on the incumbent. And the British Health Service is now apparently passing a rule that says it can deny healthcare to people if they're racist. Sorry, sir, we discovered a racist Twitter post from 2012. We are denying you chemotherapy. Sorry, sir, you made homophobic comments online a few years ago. No antibiotics for you. This is the first Luke Ford stream I've watched in 18 months. This is not a good sign for my mental health. Okay, let's get back here. Honey Kurtz researching AA history.
The word document is really tremendously broad. It doesn't just mean a piece. Most people hear document, they think of a piece of parchment or some sort of a legal paper. And no, a document is anything tangible. And so a tombstone is a document. A recording is a document. And the thing with Alcoholics Anonymous, especially, probably true of anything of that age, the fundamental document is memory. And I'd really like to talk about memory because it is so difficult to understand it and to use it. The ancient Greeks had a marvelous image for memory. Memory is a bird cage in which there are all these different kinds of birds. And if you want to remember something, you reach into the bird cage and you pull out a sparrow, except that maybe instead you come out with a bluebird. And so memory is fallible. The best metaphor currently, really, memory is a construction site. If you've ever hung around a construction site as a kid, it changes from day to day. And things are put there, and you go away, and you come back, and they're not the way you left them. And things are changed, and they still are basically there, but there has been some sort of a change that's taken place in them. And this is how our memory works. There is no such thing as an unadulterated memory. Ulrich Neisser published a book entitled John Dean's Memory, in which he did an analysis of Dean's Watergate testimony. Anyone who has a tremendous confidence in her or his own memory should read that, because it may require someone who is old enough to remember the circumstances here where it's obvious that Dean wants to say exactly what happened. This is very clear to everyone at the time, and there's no reason to disbelieve it. And yet how much distortion there is between that and what actually happened. Everybody has a filter. And I think the task of the historian is to be aware of the filter and be able to correct for it to some extent. Don't try to find someone who doesn't have a filter. Such a person doesn't exist. And so this respecting memory, because people, most of the time, they don't lie. This is the problem really with Bill Wilson. Bill Wilson, like so many people, like most of us, like me anyway, he loves to tell a good story. And this means that the people you're talking to will sort of affect what you have to say and which details you will remember. This is part of storytelling and part of history. Bill, given all that he was involved in, had a fairly good memory, but Bill was always telling stories, even when he was writing. And when we tell a story, we try to make it a good story. And this, again, part of really good historical research is understanding that. You're not out to debunk it. You're not out to say that, well, he was stupid. You're not. This is part of the human condition. We all, in fact, especially members of AA, they learn to be good storytellers. And I think what I would suggest to anybody who's doing this, think about the way you tell your story. Is the way you told your story the first time you spoke the same way you would tell it if you told your AA story tonight? And I suspect that it wouldn't be, or I suspect that if it is, you better talk to your sponsor, because there's something wrong with your sobriety if your story still looks the same way X years later. I think there's the ethic of what are you looking for, and it's okay to follow fortuitous coincidences you come across, but there's a difference between that and digging for dirt. And I think that what we come down to here is very much an Aristotelian ethic of virtue. What kind of person are you? And I would like to think in general that people who are genuinely interested in history are good people and people of virtue. I've never got into great trouble by trusting a historian. It comes along with having what in general is a virtuous personality. I mean, there are responsibilities that you have, and one of them is to what the rules of the archive are. And I don't know. I've told this story, and people just do not believe it. I mean, Nell used to trust me in those archives in a way that was absolutely really stupid of her. But she'd go home and leave me in the archives to close up. One time when I was there, she took me into this back office and said, "Here's this file cabinet, and at bottom drawer is Lois's diary, and you can't go and look there." And it wasn't locked, and I never did. I mean, my integrity said. I mean, she was trusting me so much that I would have felt like an absolute. I couldn't live with myself if I had. I mean, just really, this woman was so generous to me in so many ways, and it even could have been dangerous to her. I could not violate that kind of trust, and I would hope that any serious researcher would have that same kind of integrity. I think integrity is essential. We're not out to dig up the dirt. We're out to find the truth, and I hope I never get. Well, I was once sworn to trial because if anyone you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, it's impossible to tell the whole truth, Your Honor. It's because again of context and all the things that are hanging on. There's always a context going on. I've been asked this question before, I think again on film. Could AA have come out of any other place in time? And my answer is no. The American 1930s was a unique, or were, what's 30s plural or not? The 1930s were a unique decade.
Unemployed men and women today are struggling to keep their homes and families together. Won't you help them?
The culture reached bankruptcy. 1929 was to the United States what 1914 was to Europe, the shattering of an illusion that everything is sweet and progress from here. And the recognition of hitting bottom. When I was doing the research on Cleveland, this is where my Cleveland research bridge was my AA research. The leading restaurant in town was the restaurant in the Holland Inn Hotel. And the Holland Inn Hotel was where all the high-class people ate. And the Holland Inn Hotel kept putting out its full menu, but nobody could come and afford the food, so they threw it all out. So guess what? You had middle class and upper middle class period rummaging through the trash barrels outside the Holland Inn Hotel. And one story especially, the guy was telling me he was so embarrassed that he'd been reduced to this rummaging through a trash barrel, trying to find really edible food, and he was hoping no one would see him. And he looked up, and there was his former boss standing opposite him, rummaging through another trash can. I mean, this was a traumatic experience for the culture. The culture hit bottom in the 1930s, and this is the context in which to understand AA. I think in the first place, just the basic rules of history. Do not have at least two independent sources saying the same thing to confirm something, and make sure that they are independent. To take an example, I had heard for years, this is after Not God was published in more recent history, that Bill Wilson was a womanizer. Well, this sort of bothered me. I mean, people were saying this, and I was wondering what's it based on. And finally, I even used the History Lovers listserv to put out a query. I got in touch with the people who wrote the book saying this. Fran Hartigan and Susan Cheever, others have put this in the book, and I called them and say, why did you say this? What was your evidence for this? And I found that all the evidence came back to one person, Tom P., who had worked with Bill in the 1940s and into the 1950s, and had a falling out with Bill, and he had offered this as an item of his knowledge, but there was no evidence beyond that. He didn't adduce any evidence for it, especially. And I found out that some of the stories that were spun supporting this, like there was a thing known as the Founders Watch. When Bill traveled, they had a committee sort of protecting the maidens of the city from Bill's advances. And I followed that up with some cities that were mentioned, such as Chattanooga, Tennessee, and found out that nobody down there knew anything about it. And this was just one of those rumors. So I think the first thing is to make sure that you have evidence that you can rely upon, and that means going back not just to what somebody says, but where did they learn it? Follow it back as far as you can. And this, again, this was basic historical research. What is your evidence? Well, first of all, you start off by rejoicing. Last thing in the world you need is more stuff that proves the same thing. You look for a way in which you can embrace both. And the reason I said you rejoice is because there's where the critical thinking comes in that really makes for historical thinking. How did this person come to this conclusion, and how did this person come to this conclusion? What underlay these? And probably more than half the time, you won't find it. And so conflicting truth is a sign, usually, that one of them can't be the total truth. And when recognize that there's a conflict, two different understandings of something. How did something come about? I'm trying to think of an example from the travels of early AA. Did AA come into the Upper South mainly because of AA salesmen coming out of New York, or because of people from AA out of the Akron area who had ties to those upper southern states? Well, you can say it was Akron AA is what shaped the AA in Kentucky and Tennessee and Carolina, and say, no, it was New York AA and the salesmen who were down there that shaped AA in Kentucky and Tennessee and North Carolina, and those are two conflicting, and each side is going to have evidence. Well, look at the relative evidence, and I don't know what you're going to find on that particular one, but there probably is truth to both. There probably, in most of the time when we come across conflicting truths, there's an element of truth in each. One may be more true than the other, more closer to what actually happened, but that's what the historian is investigating. That we appeal off the generalization to what comes underneath. Make sense? This is the other thing that we come up against. We look to what somebody said and say, well, it didn't happen that way. Why are they lying? It's not a case of why somebody is lying. We ask first, do they have an agenda? And for example, there are people who are amateurs around the edges of AA history who have a definite agenda. They want to prove that AA had a special relationship to the Oxford Group. They want to prove that AA is especially functional for Christians or Christianity. They want to prove that AA really came to flourish in the city of Cleveland first as opposed to other places. Just because everyone has an agenda of one kind or another. I mean, the only agenda is to find out what really happened. That probably is the agenda, but there are things always going on in our minds that we would like to be true. The truth will not always be what we want to find. And I think that very often, in fact, probably always, we set out with some sort of an agenda, some item, maybe not even conscious of it, something that we're sure of and we're sort of looking to prove. And respect has to go.
Trump administration launched a politically motivated investigation after a demand to do so by George Soros. And Dershowitz says he can prove it. Chief Breaking News correspondent Trace Gallagher has the latest on this story. Hey, Trace.
Hi, Tucker. Alan Dershowitz says it's very common for, quote, people to whisper to presidents and for presidents to whisper to the Justice Department. The Harvard law professor emeritus also said it's wrong. Whoever does it, nonetheless, it's common. But ears perked up when Dershowitz said this. Watch.
I have some information as well about the Obama administration, which will be disclosed in a lawsuit at some point, but I'm not prepared to disclose it now, about how President Obama personally asked the FBI to investigate somebody on behalf of George Soros, who is a close ally of his.
George Soros, of course, is the left-wing billionaire mega donor, and Dershowitz also claims he has the evidence to back up his statement, pointing to the actual 302 form, which is significant considering that's the primary form the FBI uses to memorialize witness statements. All of this comes in the wake of Attorney General Bill Barr openly asking President Trump to stop tweeting about ongoing Justice Department matters. Barr also says President Trump never personally intervened in a criminal matter. A group of 1,000 former DOJ officials, organized by a left-wing group, then sent a letter demanding Barr's resignation. Alan Dershowitz says when those 1,000 former DOJ officials learn about President Obama whispering to the DOJ, he doubts they would pass the shoe on the other foot test. The Washington Post has slammed Bill Barr for acting as Trump's wingman, even though former AG Eric Holder publicly identified himself as Obama's wingman. Tucker.
Amazing. Thanks for keeping track. Trace Gallagher, good to see you. Well, in a bid to revive his sinking campaign, Joe Biden is rebranding himself tonight. He's now the illegal immigration candidate. In a recent interview with Jorge Ramos, Biden for the first time explicitly repudiated the right-wing extremism of Barack Obama, who, by the way, is racist, apparently.
Would you take then responsibility for the 3 million people that were deported during the Obama-Biden administration?
Look, we've
talked that in the past.
Yeah, we have. And we took far too long to get it right.
Most of the people that you deported didn't have a criminal record.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
But so was that wrong? Because you haven't. Many people are expecting you to apologize for that, to say that it was wrong.
I think it was a big mistake. Took too long to get it right.
A big mistake.
Mistake, yeah.
In the same interview, which you should watch if you have the stomach for it, Biden called illegal immigration an unalloyed good for this country. Without illegal aliens, in fact, he told us America would collapse.
Guess what? They're the reason why. The legal as well as undocumented are the reason why our society is functioning, the reason why our economy is growing. We don't talk about that. We stand up and act like it's a burden. It is not a burden. It's a gift.
Yeah, not if you live where Joe Biden lives. It's not a burden. At a rally in Nevada, Biden declared bluntly that illegal immigrants are, by definition, more American than you are, buddy.
Once again, legalize all the DACA students. These DACA students are more Americans than most Americans are. No, I'm serious. Think about it.
So at this point, the Biden campaign's effective slogan is, because Americans don't deserve America. Good luck, Joe Biden. Mark Krikorian is executive director at the Center for Immigration Studies, and he joins us today. Mark, thanks so much for coming on. Now, you spent a lot of your life trying to hold the line on borders. Is it surprising to learn that illegal aliens, people who've come here without a permission and broken our laws to stay here, are literally more American than we are, than you are?
Well, I mean, this is the direction that the Democratic Party has been moving, which is why you see Biden moving in that direction, too. I mean, it's not like he believes any of this or even understands what he's talking about, because, you know, back not that long ago, he voted for the Secure Fence Act. He even during this campaign, he said that sneaking across the border should no longer be a criminal offense. So I think he's made a decision that he's floundering, and he's going to fully embrace the hard left position on immigration, which is now the mainstream position. Bernie Sanders has done exactly the same thing. So it doesn't surprise me really at all when you see the way the Democratic Party has been moving even before Trump. This isn't just a reaction to Trump. This was starting before that.
It does, though, transcend mere policy. There's a moral component to the argument he's making. Illegal aliens are more American than you are. They have more of a right to be here. They're better people. They're the example. You're the disgrace.
Absolutely.
Has any national politician ever made that argument before?
Yeah, actually. Jeb Bush. He said that immigrants, he talked to immigrants in general. He wasn't specifically talking about illegal aliens, but he was including them. They're more fertile, they're more family oriented, they're more religious, they're harder working. So this is, this is an indication of how immigration isn't really purely a right-left thing. In fact, it's more an up-down thing. Jeb Bush, Michael Bloomberg, Joe Biden, and AOC all really have the same position on immigration.
Well, sure, because they've failed. Our schools are a joke. The suicide rate's up. Drug OD rate's up. The military can hardly recruit people because no one's physically fit enough to serve. They've screwed up the country, and so they're just giving up and looking for new people who they haven't screwed up yet. I mean,
well, I think it's more than that. I think it's more than that, actually, because, as you said, I think there's a moral element to it. They just think that foreigners are better than Americans, just better in general.
Yeah.
And so this is one of the places you see that perspective most clearly, and it really is alarming. And, like they say, this is why you have Trump.
They don't care about the people they're in charge of. That's the core problem. It's always been the core problem. Mark Krikorian, thank you for that. Good to see you.
Thank you.
So, Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich, a liberal Democrat, has been in jail.
Okay, so Prager University is dispensing red pills. Marianne Williamson caught on a hot mic swallowing a big red pill. Leftism makes people mean. It does. Okay.
It's such a... What does it say that Fox News is nicer to me than the lefties are?
I'm sorry?
What does it say that the conservatives are nicer to me?
It's our world.
It's such a bizarre world. You know, I'm such a lefty. I mean, I'm a serious lefty. I understand why people on the right call them godless. I mean, it's like, I didn't think the left was as mean as the right. They are.
Tolerance. It's a word we hear a lot these days, but let's define it. Tolerance is the ability to live with people whose opinions and behavior you don't agree with. That's essentially how Oxford defines it, how Merriam-Webster defines it, and how we as a society have always defined it. You might be for the death penalty and your cousin might be against it. You might be against a $15 minimum wage and your coworker might be for it. Your dad might have voted for Trump, your mom might have voted.
Okay, some words of wisdom there from Dave Rubin. Okay, what's going on with Kathy Zhu getting banned from Twitter? His JF's commentary.
Bizarre interactions, sometimes porn with uniforms. Anyways, the idea is that Mindy Robinson is involved in porn. Machiavelliscus sends a super chat. He says, "Revenge porn. What's that? Revenge porn is when revenge porn is when you are a boyfriend of someone, you have pictures of them naked, and you publish them to intimidate them. Maybe it's your ex, maybe you are trying to hurt her, and you are publishing private pictures of her naked or you having sex with her, which were not consented to be published. That is what revenge porn is. So we have Mindy Robinson, and there's lots of discussion around Mindy Robinson to the point where Cassandra Fairbank and Ashley Ray Goldenberg says, they are criticizing this girl, and they're like, look, this girl claims to be a conservative, but she has done all these pictures naked before. Personally, I don't have a strong opinion against porn. I will say that if you do the transfer between cam girl and right-wing political thinker, I don't have much hope for you. It's just that we can see what you're doing. It's just that you're setting your body, and then at some point for a certain industry, your body is not worth it anymore.
Okay, here's Larry King going on.
My friend Larry.
Thank you, David. Always good to see you.
I'm thrilled that you're here. We just watched together in my living. Oh, he's got a phone. There you
now
go.
let me show the audience.
Yeah, show us this phone. This old.
Is Samsung makes it. I visited that company in Korea.
Yeah.
Samsung.
And it's ringing right now.
It is. Actually, hello. Hey, Cannon, where are you? Oh, you didn't have a game today. I got a list. You got a doubleheader this coming Saturday. How did you do? Actually. Oh, it's great. That's a 333 batting average, Cannon. Well, I'm doing David Rubin's podcast now. I'm on his show, and while talking to you, the audience is watching me talk to you. Oh, wow. Cannon, you're a starter, so you could do 10 minutes when you open the refrigerator. He wants to do his own podcast.
I'll bring him in.
He's going to be 20 years old. I'll bring him here. He's a great kid. All right, Ken, when am I going to see you? Tonight I'm tied up. Tomorrow I got to do that. How about Thursday? How about Friday night? All right. The night before your doubleheader. I'll be at both games. Okay, I'll be there. I love you, Cannon. Okay. Talk to you tomorrow. What? What? No, what? Today? That's great. The Dodgers got Mookie Betts and David Price today.
You're breaking news for me, man.
That's tremendous. Who did they give up for them? Oh, that's two pretty good players. Kenta Maeda can pitch, and Alex Verdugo is going to be a star. So Peterson, is there someone going from the Angels to the Red Sox? Wow. Cannon, you bring me great news. That's great, Cannon. Thank you for this, and the audience here thanks you. He says, tell him anytime. Okay, Cannon, baby, I love you. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye. Well, folks, the Dodgers got Mookie Betts and David Price, and Jock Peterson went to the Angels, three-way trade.
See, you are a newsman. Breaking news.
See, that's my
Dave
excitement.
Rubin
You realize that
react to
thousands
this?
and thousands of people
Now know that Mookie Betts is on the Dodgers.
and now know that you love your son. You love your kids. I've seen you with a couple of
I got
kids.
3 grown.
Yeah.
And the other 2 are grown, 21 and 20. He's 20. He's the youngest. He's a peach of a kid. He's just all over the place.
Yeah.
As you could almost tell from that. Chance is 21. He'll be 21 in March. He goes to USC, doing an internship at Fox Sports. He's a baseball pitcher. He's a great kid.
Is baseball your true love?
Yeah, I love all sports. I love the Clippers. I love basketball. I love pro football, but baseball. Baseball to me is the supreme sport. It's a perfect sport. It is athletic chess. No one's ever mastered it. No one ever hit 500.
Okay.
And then you're setting it for some other purpose. That being said, ultimately, it doesn't keep you from doing it. You can do it. And you could be a great political thinker that has just happened to have needed to have some money when you were young, and you've done some of these porn videos. Okay, it's possible. So that being said, someone on Twitter starts publishing a picture. It is a picture of Ashley Reupenberg in bikini. She says bikini, yes. It does have the typical neck hanging that you wouldn't see on a bra. So it is a bikini, but it looks like a situation of cam girl type, soft porn perhaps, or perhaps it's just a private photo of her. In any case, she's not involved in sex. It doesn't look like a professional porn of any kind, but that's what she publishes. And then the guy, Mac Logan, also publishes professional porn involving Cassandra Fairbanks, tape on the mouth type of BDSM stuff, absolutely naked and sometimes involved in sex. And I am also, lots of pictures, yes. So real porn, something that could be described as hardcore porn. So, so the claim that this is underage porn is invalid. First, Cassandra Fairbanks has tattoos on herself at this point, so she had to consent to tattoos. Also, these pictures come from 2011-ish, as Political Cathy pointed out on her Telegram account. And so 2011, Cassandra Fairbanks is currently 34 years old. 2011, 2020, -9, that brings us to her having 25 years old on these pictures. And they are pictures that are, it's readily affirmative just from the picture that this is not unconsensual or non-professional porn. It just looks like porn with professional actors and professional setup. At least that is my view. So the other claim that it is revenge porn, I have no reason to believe this. These photos have been going around, have been present on the internet forever. If it was underage or revenge porn, there would be possibilities to involve the police with this. And I don't see the police being involved. So I assume that based on the mathematical calculations and my own review of the pictures, that what I'm seeing here, at least maybe there's other pictures, but what I'm seeing here is absolutely consensual, adult, professional porn. Cosmonaut says, hey JF, Cathy Zhu lost her Instagram account just now. Oh yes, another one bites the dust. When it starts falling, the waves of censorship, it doesn't stop coming. It's amazing. It's amazing. Cathy Zhu is this MAGA beauty queen, which by the way doesn't make sense because when you are a beauty queen, you are supposed to be the most beautiful of your style. Cathy Zhu here is not the most beautiful Asian in the US. She's not even close. I've had more beautiful Asian girlfriends in my own life. I'm a nutist of the worst kind. I've found better than this girl. How is she a beauty queen? I have no idea. Anyway, she's not a beauty queen anymore. She got dethroned. Why? Because she was standing for Make America Great Again, Trump. So she loses her mainstream appeal for being right-wing, and yet, since she has been political Cathy on Twitter, she has been complaining against the right wing, complaining against racism, complaining against the trolls of the internet. And I saw that this was headed toward a very bad direction. She was too involved. She was too emotional about it. And today it has exploded, as I could have predicted. And it ends up that it's her attack against Cassandra Fairbanks that has led to her demise. Now, what would she do? You have been involved in porn/beauty queen pageant up until you're 22. You're rejected from this domain. You have been a political commenter on Twitter for a couple of months. You couldn't even hold. This is what I can't believe. People are trusting these people to become some sort of leaders, and they don't even have the minimal intelligence to keep a freaking account going.
What people would you think I wasn't going to find out?
They should learn from me. They should have private coaching sessions from Papa JF. There's certain things you can't do. Don't publish the porn of others. Is that not elementary? Is that not understandable? Friendly Necessary says, a close-up of Cathy as me thinking about the public space. Thoughts? I don't know what you mean there. Medhead says, can you elaborate more on epigenetics from yesterday's stream? What's its connection with natural selection? And have you heard about transgenerational epigenetics inheritance and the famine studies? What do you think explained the rise of Christianity in Europe, especially considering how oppressed it was by the Romans?
Okay, let's get back, I think, to Richard Spencer.
He does PC Science. He's just published a book called How to Argue with a Racist. Which it's not the kind of book you expect scientists to publish, really. Which I'm looking forward to. It's a science hack, really. Which I'm looking forward to reading. But he noted on Twitter that it's a bit of a red flag when an academic uses a non-university email address on papers, i.e., the person is an independent academic. They're not working at a university. Why is it a red flag? Well, obviously, because these days working at a university is evidence that you are part of the religion. It's evidence that you either pay lip service to the religion or genuinely believe in it. So, of course, it's a red flag if you use your own email address. It means you don't work for a university, and you might be advocating truth that is not limited by religious truth.
Right.
So, by the new religious truth, by the multiculturalist truth, the moral truth. And so that's what we're dealing with here. And so that's why they can do these things. It's a religious cult which is allowing a church, really. That's what YouTube is kind of, a big cathedral in which the infidels are permitted to enter. But if those infidels break the rules by, besmirching the shrine or whatever, then they will be removed forever. They will be burned, indeed. It's unforgivable. And that's where the comparison you made to murder fits in. Heresy is worse than murder. Heresy was always worse than murder. The sentence for murder, it was a felony. The sentence under English law for murder was the same as the sentence for stealing. You hang you. But the sentence for heresy, you're burned at the stake.
Tortured to death, yeah.
Tortured to death. And it's to death. So I think it makes sense. Permanent destruction and no going back because you're a heretic.
Well, we're the heretics.
Well, yeah, I'm the jolly heretic, and various different. We have the Irish heretic and the American heretic, the Southern heretic, Texas heretic. But yeah, this is it. Yes, I think so. It's terrible what's happened to him, but he's been burned. He's been burned.
Yeah, and optics won't save him. I mean, it's the lesson, and his optics were god awful to begin with. But it's always kind of a joke. But anyway, it is definitive proof that even being ultimately telling your followers to support Republicans won't help you either. Yeah, it's about those times where he has ironically or unironically spoken something true, and that is unforgivable.
Indeed.
I mean, when you look at the size of these tech giants, the power to have it, and you hear some of the sort of mainstream discourse around these issues, it kind of shows how outdated our approach to these things are. Like, when you hear people talking about the private property rights or whatever, or the fact that they acquired this power fairly or whatever, it's like, so much of these companies was just timing and kind of getting there first. Like, I mean, there's not anything especially superior in the layout of the Facebook website. I mean, maybe to
Twitter's technology or something. It's technology
even
that was around for a decade. It's blogging effectively. It's just kind of
and even then it's like maybe you have the right to capitalize on that for a few years, but like 2 decades after, to still just be having a monopoly and just endlessly accumulating on the basis of doing well 20 years ago with that business model. And then again, the separation as well of public and private. I mean, like, the internet basically came out of the Pentagon, and that's just fine division then that anyone, any Mark Zuckerberg that comes along and becomes multi-billionaire out of it, that's entirely his property rights, whatever. I mean, I just think the scale these things are moving. Even looking at someone like Mike Bloomberg, like the power he has to shape culture, like he's put 300 million into targeting social media and spreading memes and all this stuff. Like, just the whole sort of models we have to discuss this just seem so outdated now. Like, I kind of, that's why I'd support a wealth tax, because there's a stage of accumulation now where it's a smaller and smaller elite, but their wealth and power is just beyond any scale conceivable, and the power it's given them is just insane.
What about a national maximum wage?
No,
I don't think it's necessarily the wage that's the issue. It's not even the income. It's the wealth in that sense. Yeah.
Just a potential for sort of endless accumulation.
Yeah, I think ultimately, I mean, this is a much bigger issue, but I think we need to get away from having a wealth middle class.
Okay, what's Tucker saying?
Workers in Nevada are in trouble. Adjusted for geography, that state has one of America's highest poverty rates. It's barely below California. Sanders understands this, and he says it often.
I think we're going to win in Nevada. I think we're going to win in South Carolina. Working people understand that we have got to finally stand up to the corporate elite, and that we have to have a mass political movement of working people and low-income people and young people to do that.
So will Sanders make things better if he gets elected? Probably not. His program is not very smart. But he's got millions of supporters in part because at least he admits they're a problem. And if you want to stop Bernie Sanders, it's worth understanding what's driving the movement that backs him. Orrin Cass is executive director at American Compass. He joins us tonight. Orrin, thanks so much for coming on.
Hey,
so
Tucker.
This is a subject of fascination. Bernie Sanders, like Trump in 2016, has basically elbowed a lot of talented, well-funded people out of the way to become the frontrunner, which I think he is at this point. It's worth understanding why. What are the forces that have led to this? You're an expert on the economic numbers that are ignored. What do you think is driving it?
Well, I think a huge part of the problem is just the economic pressure that families are under. If you look at how quickly wages are going up and compare that to how quickly a lot of the biggest costs are going up, and we're talking about healthcare, housing, college education, they're just families are getting swamped. And so they're saying we need a solution, and Bernie's solution is, well, what if we just give you things? And that's not, I don't think, a very good solution, but until everyone's willing to acknowledge this is a problem and something we have to address, I think a lot of people are going to take his solution over people who are just covering their ears and saying there's nothing wrong.
Well, that's right. I mean, so clearly there are a lot of, kids who don't understand economics and smoke a ton of weed who support Bernie Sanders, but there are also a lot of adults who do. And that'll almost by definition suggest desperation. Why would you do that? There are lots of mainstream candidates who can support. Give us a picture of what specifically is making people that desperate.
Well, so something that I look out at in a new report I've been working on is, let's just take those biggest costs. Let's take housing, healthcare, education, and transportation. And let's look at how many weeks of work a man would need to provide those things for his family. If you go back to the 1980s, you'd need about 30 weeks of work to do that. So you've still got plenty of the year to cover everything else. Fast forward to 2018, and you need 53 weeks of work to cover those things. Now, even non-economists will know there are fewer than 53 weeks in the year. And so that's maybe, that's my biggest insight for you, is there's literally not enough time in the year left, even just to cover those big chunks before we get to everything else a family needs.
So this is a much longer conversation, and I would refer people to American Compass for all the details. But if you could sum it up, what caused that change?
Well, I think there are two things. One, costs have been going up a lot. And two, wages have stopped going up. And if wages had continued to move up for lower and middle class workers the way they had been in the middle of the century, the way they have been for people who are doing better off, then wages would have kept up with costs. But instead we have things like healthcare and education. Those costs are moving up at the rate that higher income households can afford to pay for them. And if your wages aren't moving up like that, then you're just getting left behind.
Well, that's exactly right. Those are the numbers we should be paying attention to, and I'm glad you are. Orrin Cass, American Compass, great to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And a Fox News alert to end the hour. On the left, you're looking at live pictures out of Denver, Colorado, where the former governor of Illinois, Rod...
Okay, we'll go back to the Richard Spencer stream.
Class-based elite. I mean, I think that is kind of the root of the problem. An Aryan tripartite society, there are those who fight, those who work, and those who pray. And effectively, we have those who work, a kind of bourgeois elite, and those who pray working together. There does have to be an elite that's outside of that, that's about blood and iron. And we don't have that. I mean, the military people, I mean, they're tools of the system. I mean, they're not guarding anyone. And we need to ultimately cultivate that. But that's a intergenerational project that will, if it is completed, will be completed after our lifetimes.
I mean, even if you look at the university system, like you can count on one hand, like, you'd think academics having tenure that there'd be more people maybe speaking out, but I mean, you can count them on one hand, like Kevin MacDonald and Ricardo Duchesne. Like, there's.
He's tired. Think of the social pressure you're under, though. You're working in these departments, and you have to work with these people. Do you want to go into, even if you've got tenure, do you really want to go in every day and be hated?
Yeah.
And everyone,
yes.
I mean, that's what's surprising about it, though. You'd hope that there'd be a few academics that would put,
I would kind of love
the integrity of their work ahead of that.
Yeah, there are a few. There will be a minority like Philippe Rush and get a rise out of that. Fine, they're perfectly happy to do that. In fact, they would enjoy doing it. They would double down. They don't have.
But for most people, they absolutely don't want that. And as someone, I was in graduate school and I was hiding out. I did have my views while I was at Duke University and at the University of Chicago, but I kind of wouldn't let it slip too much. But as Ed knows this as well, the kind of, I don't know the right word, this just mundane, unbearable totalitarianism of the faculty meeting. All of these just pudgy people with ponytails sitting around talking about minutia for 2 hours. It's just unbearable. I mean, do you even get through that is something. And if you're a heretic in that system, they'll kill you by 1,000 cuts. They'll just slowly eat you alive. And
my PhD supervisor,
it's unbearable for someone who's a heretic.
My PhD supervisor was a New York rabbi.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he was he was a Marxist. He was a New York rabbi and a Marxist.
Makes sense.
But he was also a reasonable guy. He was one of those leftists who he wouldn't agree with you, but he wouldn't go mad and emotional if you criticised the orthodoxy.
Right.
And the problem is, particularly I think with the rise of women in universities, because they are less emotionally stable than men, this is increasingly a problem. And that's why I really am pushed towards the view that they're ruining higher education, and something needs to be done about it. Something very serious needs to be done about it. It's just the feminization.
I do wonder if it was only men in academia. I think it'd be a lot different in that sense.
I think people would men also like the confrontation more. They would like let's actually get in a debate with a fascist. This will be really, sparks will fly. Women do not tolerate that. They want to attack you and silence you and be passive aggressive and so on.
What I always found,
I do think it would be better. I don't think it'd be a total solution because this is an ideological thing, but it would certainly be a lot better.
I mean, I always found in college doing social sciences, it was like 90% women in that like 110, 120 IQ range that just kind of were capable enough to repeat back what they could figure out their lecturer would want them to say. And they just kind of happily coasted through for 4 years like that, and then went into some sort of mid-level management or graduate job. And then, a few men there as well that kind of repeat the same thing to impress the overwhelming majority of women.
Yeah. I remember the last time... Real quick, the last time I was in an academic environment, strictly speaking, was actually 2018, and it was at Georgetown. And I was still in the DC area at that time, and I went to hear this lecture at Georgetown on the alt-right. And I guess they were probably a little bit surprised that I arrived there. But there was this pudgy woman who came up, and she had a really round head, and she just kind of waddled up, and she was saying she was just saying all of this nonsense to introduce everything, just stuff that just I can't even repeat it because it doesn't make sense. It's just all of these buzzwords and non-logical connections between concepts and so on. And she looked so much like an American Puritan type, just this boring, not good-looking, not dynamic person just spouting off dogma. And I was just thinking to myself, she is that type. Her great-great-grandmother was doing the same thing at her Presbyterian church that she's doing now, which is basically maintaining ideological order while being just goofily incoherent while doing it.
So Richard Spencer was at this event on the alt-right in Georgetown 2018. After the event, he went up to talk to one of the panelists, Jacob Siegel, who's a contributing editor at Tablet magazine. And Richard goes up and introduces himself and puts his hand out, and Jacob would not even shake his hand. Jacob would talk to him, but he wouldn't shake his hand. Jacob Siegel wrote the lengthy Tablet magazine profile of Paul Gottfried that came out about 3
and just being a total mediocrity and kind of benefiting from your own mediocrity, which is something that I despise.
That's the brilliance of Jim Goad's concept of the new church ladies.
Yeah,
it's exactly true, and it can be sort of proven really through historical data that women were more religious than men until the 50s. At that point, the church, or the 60s. At that point, due to the undermining of the traditional culture, the church began to collapse. They were no longer inculcated with religion, and then they started to be inculcated with feminist ideas, essentially anti-religious ideas. And now women are less religious. They're more left-wing than men. Women are more religious. Women are more left-wing than men. I've got this bit mixed up. Sorry, women were more right-wing than men until the 50s, and that was because they were more religious than men, and the religiousness was a traditional religiousness that was promoting right-wing traditional things. With the collapse of this religiousness, they're still more religious in the sense that they're more likely to believe in God or whatever, but they're now more left-wing than men. That same religious impulse of sort of certainty and social stuff being more important than truth, and the groupishness being more important than truth, has been taken from being a Puritan, like this woman's great-great-grandmother, to being a woke person.
Yes.
So I'm looking at the description here at the MPI Radix YouTube channel. The description for this video is, this past week, Nick Fuentes was expelled from the world's largest video platform, YouTube. Adding insult to injury, it happened on Valentine's Day, already the most painful day of the year for incels. Well, Nick is not an incel. He could very easily get laid. He just happens to have moral, religious values that are higher than satisfying his religious impulses. So I think it's fair to call Nick Fuentes an incel, but I guess it's mildly funny if you want to be mean and stupid about it. Let's go back here to Dr. Ernie Kurtz on researching AA's history.
Our investigations lead us, and to be open to follow the investigation, even if it leads where we don't want to go. And if we don't want to go there, okay, hand it off to somebody else. The historian seeks the truth, knowing that she or he will never find all of it, or never even find it completely clear. It's a precious gem to which there's still a bit of dross hanging on, and I think that this and the other thing I think, and it's easy to feel when we have a truth that we have the truth, and this historical truth should be presented tentatively. How often when we think we discovered a bit of truth, we've got to promote it and convince others. No, our task is not to convince, our task is to present. And that's all we can do. If we try to convince, there's something wrong. We might have to present more clearly, but our job is not to persuade people. Our job is not to persuade people. Our job is to make available what we have learned. I think something else that we should do, again, in the quest for truth, is look at these people who think differently than we do and evaluate their arguments. Some of the things that they say about AA that are negative just happen to be true. And if the historian's devotion is to truth, and again, this idea of conflicting truths, let's recognize what is true and what they have. This is Bill's article in the Grapevine. Let's be friendly with our people who attack us. They're right some of the time. Don't be afraid. Look at AA. Look at the criticisms of AA and assess their validity and help others to understand where they're right and where they're wrong. Share what you find, not with the sense of, look, here's what I found, here's the ultimate truth. No, here's what I found. Isn't this interesting? And see what somebody else says. I think that's the ultimate thing that any historian should do in presenting what he or she found, is not to say this is the truth, but to say, hey, isn't this interesting? And then listen, because that, again, we never get the whole truth. There's one large one that I almost am embarrassed about. What I know of Bill Wilson, I really did not like. He was this really factotum of the rich. He admired rich people. He thought Franklin Roosevelt was a communist traitor. He wanted to hang around Wall Street pipes was his great adventure. And I started off with a respect and I think a degree of affection for AA, but feeling, how did this come out of, there's got to be more than this. I don't like this guy. That really was it. Well, it was reading Bill's letters. I don't know where. I think I probably was close to the 1,000th letter. It just suddenly came through to me. This is about the most compassionate human being I've ever come across in my life. I mean, Bill would say something in a letter that might even seem almost run of the mill. I strike, well, wait a minute, and I go to the letter because, of course, they kept all the incoming letters. I was reading were copies, like carbon copies. And this person had written this. Well, how did Bill? And I came to realize Bill had what therapists were calling at the time the third ear. He could hear what was not said. And then that my own metaphor developed further, partially because I was still doing some reading in psychology, but it was more than a third ear. The third ear is here somewhere. Bill was able to hear people from here, from that hole that's in the middle of all of us. And this, what had been sort of not really, I began with a dislike. I mean, anybody who hated Franklin Roosevelt, I grew up in a home, my father had been a coal miner, and Franklin Roosevelt was sort of, the name of the father and the son and of FDR. This one did not dislike Franklin Roosevelt in the homes that I grew up in. And but Bill just came through in these letters as this one perceptive. I mean, he could hear. It was more than reading between the lines. He could hear what the person couldn't say. I was reading these letters. I wasn't seeing this. And but slowly. I mean, I hope that as a result of what I went through, I think Bill helped my spiritual life. I mean, that coming into that contact with his compassion. Well, you spoke somewhat in setting this up also with, do I want any sort of legacy? And if I could bequeath anything, it would be reverence. It is. We live in a culture that tends to honor irreverence. Therefore, reverence is worth thinking about. Reverence for the truth, reverence for what we do. And there always has to be a kind of awe in it. We must study something larger than ourselves in some way and be aware of that. And AA, you're studying the story of AA. This is larger than any of us. This is larger than all of us. This is, and there is an appropriate sense of awe to be, confronted with this amazing phenomenon that cannot be wrapped around. This is how we should approach any topic we investigate. With this, you get into it and you sort of have a need to keep going. And that I hope if we're really doing history as it should be done, that sense will come. I need to finish it. I need to go. I need to go as far.
Okay, so let's go back here to JF talking about Kathy Zhu getting banned from Twitter.
When the copying process happens to create the egg, you have certain.
Okay. And his Richard and Company.
It's Monday, February 17th. About stop and frisk. So when this was recorded in 2002, there were 97,000 stops recorded. That was starting to almost double every year in the beginning of Bloomberg's administration. So it went to 160,000, 300,000, 400,000. And then by 2011, we reached a absolute peak of Bloomberg's policing efforts. And there were actually 685,000 over that stop, question, and frisk incidents. And the overwhelming majority of these, 88% of them, of the people who were stopped and frisked, were innocent. That is, they were not committing any crime, they're not carrying a gun. So 600,000 of those 685,000 were innocent. They were frisking, of these people who were frisked, 53% of them were African American, 34% were, I can't believe I'm saying this, Latinx or Latin.
Okay, let's get some Bernie Sanders, his views on Israel.
Israeli people. And to be for peace in the Middle East does not mean that we have to support right-wing, racist governments that currently exist in Israel. And let me tell you this also, and I feel strongly about it as somebody who's Jewish, and knowing how much our people have suffered over the years. Take a look at what's going on in Gaza right now. You've got youth unemployment, 70%. You got people can't even leave the area. What American foreign policy has got to be about is in the Middle East, bringing the Israelis, bringing the Palestinians together.
Okay, kumbaya, very beautiful.
The thing is, it wouldn't piss off blacks or Hispanics. They would take the view, I think, that's what I found about them, that they're practical. In fact, there's data on this of their practicality as well. Their attitude is we don't want crime. And so do something about it. And they're very happy if crime is reduced.
Right.
It's the liberals who are sheltered from crime because they're rich and they live in these areas where everyone's white, and then they preach about the benefits of multiculturalism and multiracialism and all that, but of course live in somewhere where they don't experience multiculturalism and multiracialism beyond going into some corner of town where they can go and have a pret a manger or whatever, Indian meal or something. They don't live with it, and the consequences of it, that will get upset about this, and that will of course damage his chances of making it onto the ballot of the Democratic Party. It's not the minorities. The minorities will vote for it.
I agree with you to a very large extent, but maybe this is just my perspective, but it does seem like the at least the image of white cops stopping and frisking black people does get a lot of the minorities up in arms. They don't like it. But my major point with Bloomberg, and it also it demonstrates something, which is the triumph of politics over social science, which all of this is correct, but it ultimately doesn't matter if enough uppity white people yell about it. And so Bloomberg is correct.
Yeah, yes, he is correct. So they need to disguise the ethnicity of these white cops so they don't realize they're white.
Not all of the cops are white. I've looked up all this stuff. So basically, the police, it's like 45. New York City as a whole is 45% white, and we might around the edges that might be a little bit deceiving just because of the are you Hispanic or are you a non-Hispanic white, and there's a little bit of ambiguity in there, but more or less 45% of New York City is white. The cops are a little bit whiter than the population, but not by a substantial amount. So tons of people. Police engaging in stop and frisk were minorities. But anyway, Bloomberg is simply correct when he says that 80 to 90% of the rapes, robberies, murders are committed by minorities. And by minorities, he means blacks and Hispanics. And even that is a little bit deceptive in the sense that 60-year-old black ladies aren't committing any crimes outside of speeding or whatever. And it is basically, the perpetrators are in a smallish group of people between the ages of 14 and 30, let's say, Hispanic and black youths who are doing this. And so
if the blacks could operate, I mean, if the Nation of Islam or some equivalent could operate some system where blacks between the ages of 14 and 30 were removed from the society as part of a sort of a gogi and inculcated with the martial values of the Spartans between the ages of, it would be 8 and 30, right. and then permitted to leave, then the crime rate would be substantially reduced.
No question.
There's something Spartan would be perhaps borne in mind. And as for these black old ladies that are done for speeding, they're probably speeding because they're late for church. That's the general impression I get. And so I think we should let them off that. I think that's okay.
Yes.
So yeah, that's true. I like honesty in politicians, but unfortunately, in a clown world run by lies, this is going to be used against him. And the thing he has to do is not, and the problem he's done it wrong, is never apologize, never say sorry, never back down. Of course he has, the silly idiot. He never back down. If you do it, there's actual data on this. There's proper a number of replicated studies that indicate in these kinds of situations where you're being criticized by a mob, if you back down, if you say sorry, it shows weakness, and they're bullies, so they're bullies that want to kill. So if you show weakness, you're the weak. You go from being the gazelle in the middle of the pack that they're going for because he's quite meaty to the gazelle at the back that they can drag down. So therefore, it makes it worse. They will double down on you, and it means they become suspicious. They start to think, other people start to think, why is he saying sorry? Has he got something to hide? Is he dishonest? Does he not mean what he says? And so it damages him on every level. It damages him among people that would be sympathetic to him because he's a truth teller. If he apologizes, we think, oh, well, he's slippery, he's a snake, we won't vote for him. And it damages him among the woke mob of screaming feminist, unnatural color hair, tattooed women who are going to be screaming about this. And he's apologized, so he's done. That's the brilliant thing about Trump. I don't think he should even apologize about the grabbing by the pussy remark. Never apologize.
Right.
He did apologize about that. I think that was a mistake. But otherwise, just no, never apologize, and that's what he's done. So I think he's finished. I don't think he apologized. You mustn't do that.
I get it. I don't think Bloomberg's finished. Sorry, Keith. You've been waiting there patiently, like the good young Irish boy in the pub who waits his turn to speak. While Ed and I are talking. So please jump in. But I have a lot more to say.
I was just waiting for you Anglos to finish with all your empirical data. Get all the facts and stuff out of the way early, But no, I don't think I'm thinking about it. I actually think I'm starting to fancy Bloomberg to pick up the nomination and potentially win in 2020. It's an interesting approach to basically ignore the white places like Iowa and target. He's basically targeting the non-white voters. It's an interesting tactic, and it could be a sign of things to come, because Bloomberg is really, like, New York itself is kind of as far along the sort of linear path of techno-capital as any place in the world you'll find. Sure. And then Bloomberg is like a proper expression of New York as well. He's a proper neoliberal mayor. Like, he ran as a Republican, now he's running as a Democrat. And he is kind of I guess he's like kind of a Rockefeller. Matter. He's kind of a Rockefeller Republican, yeah. And it's interesting as well, like Trump and Bloomberg they had kind of a similar start in that. I actually did a video today about what happened to New York in the 70s, because all those transformations you're talking about in New York, this was very much a top-down thing. New York was like the first real test case, together with maybe Pinochet's Chile, of...
Okay, let's have a look at New York Magazine. This obscure foundation helped fund the alt-right. First glance, Robert Rotella appears to be a typical libertarian donor. through the foundation named in his honor, the Bellevue, Washington-based founder of Rotella Capital Management, donated millions to libertarian and conservative organizations like the Cato Institute, the Reason Foundation, and Turning Point USA. One of his particular favorites is the Institute for Justice, IFJ. Since 2010, he's donated nearly $250,000 to the group. Closer look, however, at the financial records of the Robert P. Rotella Foundation, which he manages alongside his sister Rosemary, reveals that he isn't just interested in right-to-work laws or free enterprise, he's also a significant funder of white nationalism. Of the $5.8 million the foundation has donated to various causes since 2002, roughly $105,000 has gone to organizations like the National Policy Institute, which is led by neo-Nazi Richard Spencer. Comprehensive review of the foundation's available 990 reports indicate that its financial support for white nationalism began in 2014 and continued through 2018. Though $105,000 is not an exceptionally large sum of money, white nationalist organizations are small, and it doesn't take much money to keep them afloat. Annual recurring donations are kind of where it's at for these guys because they all have financial limits imposed by federal law on how large the donations can be, explained David Nywert, the author of Ought America, Rise of the Radical Right in the Age of Trump. A guy like Spencer doesn't need a single sugar daddy to give him money. Basically, the National Policy Institute is Spencer, and he just needs an annual salary. $5,000 is basically 5% of that annual income for him. Just needs another 20 of those donations, and he's done for the year. It's not that hard to get because there are a lot of people out there who are willing to keep that chunk rolling in for him every year. Rotella was one of those people. Between 2013 and 2017, his foundation donated $10,000 every year, or $40,000 total, to the Charles Martel Society, white nationalist organization that publishes the Occidental Quarterly, a pseudo-academic journal that focuses on race science. Members of the journal's advisory board include Virginia Abernathy, a Vanderbilt University professor emeritus, who describes herself as an ethnic separatist, Tom Sunick, a writer whom the Southern Poverty Law Center calls intellectual voice for white nationalists, and who once complained that the media pathologized white Western peoples into endless atonement. So these donations composed about 15% of the Charles Martel Society's donation income for the year. Rotella's foundation also funded the Federation for American Immigration Reform, or FAIR. A spokesperson for the Rotella family told New York Magazine that the Charles Martel Society and the National Policy Institute had misrepresented their work to the foundation. In retrospect, this would not have been something the Rotellas would have done if there'd been better disclosure. Southern Poverty Law Center helped publicize Charles Martel Society's role as a leading purveyor of academic racism. The Rotella Foundation also funded American Renaissance. The other main funder of Richard Spencer's organization is William Regnery II, who founded the Charles Martel Society and NPI. The Rotella Foundation's giving will soon cease. It is about to dissolve. Randy Weingarten, head of the Union American Federation of Teachers, says Robert Rotella and his support for far-right causes is Exhibit A in the disturbing story of how money has infiltrated and corrupted our political system. As a backer of Richard Spencer, Rotella represents a clear and present danger to the tolerance and diversity underpinning American democracy.
Neoliberalism and of some of the ideas of, the Business Roundtable and Hoover Institute and all these people. New York in 1975 was effectively about to go bankrupt, and that was in part due to the investment bankers that had been lending it money refusing to roll over the debt. And it was this incredible power grab in the mid-70s where this organization, 8 out of 9 of the panel were bankers, where bankers started to run the city of New York and started to slash social spending. And it's an interesting test case, because while the ideas around neoliberalism are sort of individual freedom and economic liberalism and lack of state and all this, what you see with the New York test case, and it happened as well under Reagan and other neoliberal administrations, is that actually the power of the state wasn't curtailed; it was just redirected. And the power of the central governing body of New York was sort of redirected from social welfare to kind of corporate welfare. Mm-hmm. And Trump got a start out of this because he got the biggest tax break in the history of New York State to start doing his developments, and he focused exclusively on these sort of central, more luxury, luxury developments aimed at this New York that the financiers were taking over. And at the same time, Bloomberg was working for an investment firm that doubled the revenue in the mid-70s at the time this was going on. So this was New York was completely reoriented. And those social transformations you're talking about, the liberalization of culture and New York becoming a very sort of cosmopolitan city that focused on sort of cosmopolitan sexual trends and consumerism and stuff. Mm-hmm. This was all a result of the empowerment of this elite. And so New York is kind of a perfect example of the direction that neoliberalism, that our elites are bringing us. It's 44% white. It was almost 80% white in the early 70s. It's Bloomberg, the Jewish mayor, ruling over this sort of brown underclass. It's a tale of two cities. It has the super wealthy financial elite, it's the home of Wall Street, and then at the same time it has obviously some very poor areas. And Bloomberg is like the typical neoliberal politician. He's not very strongly ideological left or right. He's a moderate on most issues, and he wasn't afraid to invest in infrastructure in New York and use the power of the state. But his governance philosophy was basically growth oriented, and he basically ran New York like a business, and that he was willing to invest in public infrastructure if it was going to be a big return on growth.
Okay, let's get back to the title topic here, more from Ernie Kurtz on the history of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Ernie, since it was first published in 1979, your book, Not God, A History of Alcoholics Anonymous, has been the definitive history of AA. How did your research into the AA Fellowship begin?
It really happened by coincidence. You know what they say in AA about coincidence, of course. I began graduate school in psychology and started getting curious about where these ideas originated, came from, mixed, and I started asking questions. They said, go audit a history course. Well, I hated history. I was in college, dates and battles, and I found out at this University of Rochester that there's a history of ideas. And this marvelous professor of medieval history, Marvin Becker, I was in his class, and I just got excited. And so I applied in graduate schools then to go on, not in psychology, but in history further. And I got accepted at Harvard, among other places, and in the History of American Civilization program. And I studied the history of ideas at that point in the late 60s, early 70s. Urban history was the thing, what was going on in the cities, if you recall, people were very interested in. So I started studying the city of Cleveland, Ohio. I'd never been there, never visited there, did not live there, therefore no implicit knowledge. So Oscar Hanlon, my mentor, was sort of excited about this, and I started studying Cleveland. And I was looking, it just couldn't hold together. And I started looking for groups of people that gathered not based on ethnicity or on religion and some kind of, we didn't have the concept, I don't think, of self-help mutual aid groups. Someone told me that AA had begun in Cleveland, and I had a cop who said, will he take me to meetings? He went to meetings. Well, and I started hearing these things that I knew couldn't be true, like that AA came out of the Oxford movement, which was in 19th century Anglican. I mean, just it didn't fit. And so I went back to Cambridge and started going to some other AA meetings and again, hearing these things that I couldn't explain and sort of on the side began looking at them. And the Cleveland dissertation sort of fell apart. And I forget who I was talking to exactly, but this was 1975 by this time. Bill Wilson had died in 1971. I had never heard the name. I didn't know who he was. I guess I'd heard his name mentioned at AA. And they said that they were putting together their archives and that, Bill's letters were being organized. And this sounded very interesting. And so I made a few inquiries through Dan Anderson at Hazelden. And I found out that exactly AA was putting together its archives. And Nell Wing, who had been Bill's secretary for many years, was the archivist. And this is a history graduate student's dream, a trove of letters of a significant person that no one else has ever seen.
A movement that no book has been written on.
Well, I didn't even think of it as a movement at that time. It was sort of a curiosity. And so...
Okay, looking at the Washington Post right now, Bill Barr is close to quitting as Attorney General over the president's tweets about the Justice Department. So Bill Barr has told those close to Trump he is considering quitting if the president keeps tweeting about Justice Department investigations. Three administration officials have said, foreshadowing a possible confrontation between the president and his attorney general over the independence of the Justice Department. So far, Donald Trump has defied Bill Barr's request, both public and private, to keep quiet matters of federal law enforcement.
I applied. Dan Anderson told me how to apply, right? The GSO and the trustees and the two academics, George Gordon and Milton Maxwell, and the Trustees Archives Committee. And I went and met them, and we got along very well. And they gave me access. And I mean, it was just incredible. Nell was arranging them strictly chronologically, all of Bill's letters. She'd never had any training as an archivist. She was a secretary. She'd begun in AA as a temp. I mean, really have to read her book to understand her story. Marvelous. And so one of the first things I did was suggest that Nell be sent to graduate school, at least for the summer, in archival studies. And she came back. And so I was on the ground floor of organizing these, and I kept seeing these letters. And by this time, I'm totally into this. I mean, Cleveland had gone by the way, and I just got into this. It was a different world then. I mean, when it got very hot in Cambridge, I'd sort of go up in New England and on day trips and haunt the book barns, and I'd see these first edition big books on the shelf of used bookstores for 50 cents, 75 cents, and I didn't bother buying them. I had a copy of that book, Alcoholics Anonymous. In fact, I had a newer edition, and I know first edition was important, but that was available to me in the A archive. So I mean, I could have been rich if I bought it with what those books go for these days. But I just totally lucked into the topic at a point where there wasn't this interest in AA, and that guy got published at a time just as this interest was burgeoning, and I think maybe helped it along somewhat by being available. But again, it was luck, or in the AA understanding, coincidence.
How did your view of AA and the co-founders in particular change through your research?
That's been interesting. I think I had an advantage. Little that I knew of Bill Wilson, I didn't like him. He'd been a Wall Street hanger-on runner. He wasn't really a broker even. Did some nice investigative work, but he clearly worshipped rich people and loved capitalism and thought that Franklin Roosevelt was betraying America. And if we'd met, I'm sure he wouldn't have liked me. Here's this pointy-headed Harvard intellectual who thinks he's so smart. And so I began going through the.
Okay, let's get an update here on the coronavirus. This is from Lou Dobbs' show.
Pillsbury, he's director of the Center for Chinese Strategy at the Hudson Institute, author of the 100-Year Marathon, international bestseller. And it's good to have you with us, Mike.
Thanks, Lou.
The president, your reaction to open for business?
Well, I remember this back in the Reagan administration. I was head of policy planning in the Pentagon, and we had these battles week in, week out over what was national security about a technology that should be denied and hurt an American company, and what was really serious and would damage our ability to win a war if the enemy got hold of it. And those decisions often depended on intelligence information, it depended on knowledge of the technology, and they went back and forth. President Reagan had a very similar approach. He didn't want to hurt our companies, but he sure didn't want to get our enemies better armed. So I think what you see with President Trump today is trying to balance that very same issue.
And that is one of course, the burdens of the presidency. He has to carry out that balance. And I do think we should put in context what the president is saying here about these engines. They've been exported to China since 2014. That's a long time to give the Chinese an opportunity for reverse engineering if they wanted to produce them. I mean, it's sort of, unless we're just now giving them the idea, they might try that. I can't imagine. Can you?
No, we had this same issue 30 years ago with India. A very similar kind of engine was being denied. The Navy Secretary at the time, John Lehman, actually told us he'd resign in protest if we cleared these engines for India. GE explained to us, the deal went through for India and about 10 other countries. GE explained to President Reagan just how hard it would be to reverse engineer the turbine blades because of where the little holes were drilled. Everybody had to learn all these details about it. And that's why the decision went forward. They never were reverse engineered.
Well, let's hope that the Chinese have exactly the same difficulty with these GE engines. Let's turn to the coronavirus. It is, as Ken Cuccinelli and I were just discussing, it is a low threat, as he put it, in this country because we only have, well, at least 15 confirmed cases. But we have others under observation. The government has done an amazing job, I think, in constraining the spread of the virus into this country. So here we are, and we have China saying that we're not welcome, though, to help them. And it's easy to start suspecting them of having a reason to deny us entry into their country to help them.
I hope you'll permit me to disagree with Ken Cuccinelli.
Sure.
I think there's a greater risk than he's talking about. I think it's at the point of danger that it's not peaked. The virus has not peaked in China. It kills doctors and healthcare workers who are closest to it. Now they're issuing a strange study yesterday that it really only harms people 80 years of age or older, who the virus kills 15% of them. So I'm a little bit suspicious of these studies and information coming out of China. If this gets out of control and we have a real pandemic, a lot of dead people will be facing the politicians who did not take this more seriously. It's a good thing, by the way, China has at last admitted the WHO, but not the American CDC yet. They postponed their own Congress. It was going to meet March 3rd. Right. It's now put off indefinitely. So the Chinese seem to be reacting as though they know that this is a really dangerous virus. They're stopping all wildlife traffic inside China. That's the source of this virus, everybody seems to think. So the Chinese are very, very serious about it. So I don't agree that it's a low risk to Americans. I think Ken means that there are very few cases so far, but it certainly is not under control even in China.
Yeah, when he talks about being a low threat to the United States, it's based on the number of cases under observation and confirmed cases of it, which I think you would agree are, I think, about as low a rate as we could hope.
Okay, so far the death toll is entirely East Asians. It's more than 95% Chinese. There are no non-East Asians who have died from the coronavirus, but you won't hear that in the news media because knowledge is bad. Being informed is bad. It's like in the 1980s, 1990s, when we kept hearing that AIDS does not discriminate, but AIDS does discriminate. In the West, AIDS happens overwhelmingly to people who engage in unprotected anal sex, men who have unprotected anal sex with men, primary transmitter of AIDS, and then people who share needles or intravenous drug use. So AIDS discriminates. The coronavirus so far appears that it very much racially discriminates. We got a news report February 15 that France reports the first death outside of Asia, but the victim is an 80-year-old Chinese tourist. So why does the media want to suppress the possibility that the coronavirus disproportionately impacts and perhaps only kills East Asians? Now, CNN medical talking head Dr. Sanjay Gupta recently asserted that corona doesn't discriminate based on race. Why do we? Well, so far, the evidence is that the coronavirus very much discriminates on the basis of race. So Gupta put that woke gotcha question to the Center for Disease Control Director Dr. Robert Redfield in response to the Trump administration having decided to temporarily suspend travel into the United States from individuals who were not Americans or permanent residents who had been in the hot zone in the last 14 days. So Lance Walton writes here, it's obviously paranoid nonsense to claim this Trump policy is discriminating based on race. Chinese Canadians will have no problem entering the US so long as they haven't been in the hot zone in the last 2 weeks. By contrast, white Brits who have been in the hot zone in the last fortnight will be denied access to the US. This is perfectly sensible. But so far, all the evidence is that the coronavirus very much discriminates by race, and there are long recognized racial differences in the susceptibility to flu-like viruses, which is why the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic was far more devastating to Native Americans and to Maoris than it was to whites. Certain kinds of flu seem to be far more deadly to East Asians than they are to blacks and whites and Hispanics. The 2003 SARS outbreak killed only, or primarily at least, East Asians. Yet the World Health Organization director said, we reiterate our call to all countries not to impose restrictions that unnecessarily interfere with international travel. Such restrictions can have the effect of increasing fear and stigma with little public health benefit. Little public health benefit. If corona really doesn't discriminate based on race, then the public health benefits of banning people coming from the area where the virus is rife from entering the US would obviously be enormous. So far, it appears the coronavirus has only been fatal to Northeast Asians. We heard that an American woman had died of the coronavirus in Wuhan, but also 60-year-old woman is not descended from the Mayflower. She was apparently a Chinese American, which doesn't make her death any less tragic, but it's obvious that all sorts of diseases racially discriminate, and this just shows how pathological our taboo of honest discussion of race has been. Race denial is so strong that possible racial differences in the incidence of a disease cannot even be mentioned in the mainstream media. All right, back to Dr. Honeycutt.
Letters looking for intellectual threads and everything was sort of this background impression of, this is this guy who, fundamentally, from my Cambridge perspective, is probably a jerk. But and I'm not sure when, but I was faithfully going through the letters. I wasn't looking at anything else. I was setting up interviews, but first there was the immersion in the letters. And somewhere, probably before the 1,000th letter, reading the responses, people would write Bill about their concerns and their problems, and I slowly began to recognize the deep understanding and compassion of this man. He obviously could read between the lines of the letters sent to him. I'd read a letter that he received, and then I go to his and say, well, what's he responding to? I go, I hadn't even noticed it in that letter. I had trained in psychology. And also his compassion. Yeah. And the other thing, his humility. He had this streak of grandiosity, thinking he was great, wanting to be on top, with which I could easily identify, but he knew it and he kept shooting himself down. He sort of made fun of his own, there I go again type thing, and which I think has been one of the saving graces in AA. Because Bill probably was in a position to be a charismatic leader and one of these dynamic people who had cults eventually, and his recognition of his own flaw and his tendency to grandiosity, I think is tremendously significant in preserving AA. From Bill to talk about big shotism, and his awareness of it. So I learned, of course, Nell was guiding us along. Nell was, virtually worshiped Bill. And I was wondering, at the beginning, why. And I slowly came to understand why. It's obviously, Nell did not have a great deal of formal education, but she had a great sensitivity. And the fact that this person so impressed her also guided me. But
so looking at the Drudge report, there's a 52-year-old African-American man who's been arrested because he apparently kidnapped a woman and forced her to watch the slavery miniseries Roots so that she could understand her racism. When she tried to move, he's accused of saying to her he would kill her and spread her body parts across Interstate 380 on the way to Chicago. Apparently the pair had been in an on and off again relationship for several years. It seems like a metaphor for America. This woman is literally forced at the threat of her life to watch the slavery miniseries Roots. The series came out in 1977, but how often are Americans forced to confront their white privilege, forced to vibe all these victim narratives? And indeed, people are victims frequently. Blacks are frequently victims, Jews frequently be victims, white people are frequently be victims. They've been victims. Show is graphic for its time, showing the beatings, the mutilations, and the so held this woman at threat for her life. She had to watch Roots so that a white woman could understand her racism.
I remember at one point you saying that one of Bill Wilson's greatest contributions was that he saved AA from himself, which I thought was very...
Exactly. Yes. Well, he said that. That's not my original thing. He said that I saved AA from myself. It's one of his... I don't think it was in a Grapevine article, actually, but maybe it was in a private letter, and as Bill sees it. But it's amazing, because one of the uniquenesses of AA is precisely that it didn't become what all these other things began, both before and after.
You've also talked about the chemistry of the co-founders at times in some of your writings, and the unique combinations of what Dr. Bob and Bill both brought together. in terms of that founding process?
It's interesting. They're both Vermonters. And as you know, in Susan Cheever's book, she develops this point because it's significant that both co-founders came from Vermont. And we have some stereotypes of Vermonters, but Dr. Bob, he was a surgeon. He went to medical school and became a surgeon. And surgeons work on one person at a time, and they don't have a lot of outside interest, especially, and they're very focused. And this is very good. I guess that's important to be a surgeon.
Looking at a Twitter thread here from Peter Brimlow, it says the silver lining to Trump's impeachment farce, it's making impeaching leftist judges easier. When I urged impeaching judges in 2009, I was told that judges have no fear of being impeached. But maybe it's time now to start impeaching far-left judges.
Bill is this glad hander. He is making a living on Wall Street because he's able to read people, and he's able. He traveled around with Lois on the motorcycle at the General Electric in Schenectady, and hanging out with the guys in the bar, was able to understand, sort of figure out what was going on in the plant that he could report back to those who were going to invest. Yeah. And so Bill was this glad hander, and it's amazing. These two people, if they met in a bar, wouldn't have even looked at each other. And you cannot think, not that Dr. Bob did that much bar drinking, of course. Most of his surgeons don't usually drink in public, but they had nothing in common, despite their common roots. Nothing in common in the way in which their temperaments and personality developed. And again, Bob's great contribution: keep it simple. Keep it simple on Bill's pull away. I think I forget who first came up with this. That if it had only been Bill Wilson, AA would have more franchises than McDonald's. And if it had been only Dr. Bob, AA would be operating out of a Carvel stand in Akron. And the leavening impact of these two on each other, even to the point of the tension between Akron and New York, which goes on to this point, goes back to that divergence in the co-founders, and in the midst of that divergence, the tremendous respect for each other. Yeah. This is the amazing thing that we talk about people in early sobriety. They only have 1 year or something like that, or these were two people who were just months dry, who developed this profound respect for each other that I think if you ask somebody today, they'd say, well, maybe after 5 or 6 years sobriety, it might be. It was just again, as I was doing this study and hearing these comments, because I was going to AA meetings to hear how this was developing, it was so striking. Yeah.
When you pulled this scholarly history together, or the real founding moments of the AA movement. In some ways, this was the first scholarly treatment of such depth of AA. What was the response of both the AA community and the professional community to the book?
It's really interesting. I wasn't writing a book. I was writing a dissertation. And, if you write a dissertation, you're writing it for 3 to 5 people, because that's, you want those letters after your name and you want to get a job. And after I received the degree in 1978, of course, Hazelden expressed interest. My Oscar Handlin wanted to see it published. He thought it was a good study, and that always helps. And I sort of went with Hazelden because they said they would keep it in print, whereas commercial publishers wouldn't. I'm very glad that I made that choice, because they have kept it in print. And at first, even when I was doing the research, the archives were on a different floor than the General Service Office. And the people in the General Service Office at the various desks, they sort of didn't, I was an intruder. And, they're very generous. If any ordinary AA walks in, they're that person's servant. They're marvelous. But I wasn't, I wasn't there, a member. And I was there as a researcher. And I didn't have much occasion to go, but I felt I got the cold shoulder. And Nell, of course, was very warm. And this was okay. I mean, you're doing research. You don't necessarily need to be loved. You try to do research. And so I did the dissertation. I gave a copy to Lois and submitted a copy. And
So Donald Trump arrived in Los Angeles today. Let's get some of his remarks here in LA.
Hello, everybody. A little windy out here, so I'll button up my coat. A couple of more people want to join you. Yes, we have commuted the sentence of Rod Blagojevich. He served 8 years in jail. A long time, and I watched his wife on television. I don't know him very well. I've met him a couple of times. He was on for a short while on The Apprentice years ago. He seemed like a very nice person, don't know him, but he served 8 years in jail. It was a long time to go. Many people disagree with the sentence. He's a Democrat, he's not a Republican. It was a prosecution by the same people, Comey, Fitzpatrick, the same group, very far from his children. They're growing older, they're going to high school now, and they rarely get to see their father outside of an orange uniform. I saw that, and I did commute this sentence. So he'll be able to go back home with his family after serving 8 years in jail. That was a tremendously powerful, ridiculous sentence, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many others. Yes. I have total confidence in my opinion. Well, people like that, but everybody has the right to speak their mind, and I use social media. I guess I use it well because here I am. I'm here. And I probably wouldn't have gotten here without social media because I certainly don't get fair press. So I wouldn't have gotten here without social media, and perhaps with all of the hoaxes, you had the impeachment hoax, you had the Mueller hoax, you had the Russia nonsense, all the scams. And if I didn't have social media, I probably wouldn't be here. So I'm very happy with social media, but I think he's doing an excellent job. He's a strong guy. I never spoke to him about the Roger Stone situation. Roger Stone, just so you know, never worked. He didn't work for my campaign. There might have been a time way early, long before I announced, where he was somehow involved a little bit, but he was not involved in our campaign at all. And I think it was a very, very rough thing that happened to Roger Stone, because when you look at what happened with Comey after a 78-page horrific report, when you look at what happened to McCabe with a recommendation of prosecution, and you look at all of these other people, and then you look at what happened to General Flynn, a highly respected man, look at him, his life has been destroyed. You look at a Roger Stone for a tweet and some other things. You take a look at what's happening to these people, somebody has to stick up for the people. So my social media is very powerful. I guess Mark Zuckerberg.
And Keith Woods tweets, Kathy Zhu is a great advertisement for modern conservatism. Used her time on Twitter and Instagram to celebrate degeneracy, for people incels to stand up for the right of big tech, to deplatform right-wingers, defended eating bats, calling other egos ugly, and she posted revenge porn. Fine, good riddance.
Just recently said Trump is #1 in the world on social media, which is a very nice statement, I guess. Certainly it's something you could be at least a little bit proud of, but it means to have a voice. So I'm able to fight the fake news.
Have you heard him refer to the Don River speech? I mean, also he said your comments on Twitter, and you think it's impossible to...
Well, but it allows me... Yeah, I do make his job harder. I do agree with that. I think that's true. He's a very straight shooter. We have a great attorney general, and he's working very hard. And he's working against a lot of people that don't want to see good things happen, in my opinion. That's my opinion, not his opinion. That's my opinion. You'll have to ask what his opinion is. But I will say this. Social media for me has been very important because it gives me a voice. Because I don't get that voice in the press, in the media. I don't get that voice. So I'm allowed to have a voice.
You can still do his job with integrity, though.
Oh, yeah, he's a man with great integrity. The Attorney General is a man with incredible integrity. Now, just so you understand, I chose not to be involved. I'm allowed to be totally involved. I'm actually, I guess, the chief law enforcement officer of the country. But I've chosen not to be involved. But he is a man of great integrity. But I could be involved if I wanted to be. Yes, I just pardoned Bernie Garrett, a man who has many recommendations from a lot of good people. You know, oftentimes, pretty much all the time, I really rely on the recommendations of people that know them. We have Bernie Garrett, we have Mike Milken, who's gone around and done an incredible job for the world with all of his research on cancer, and he's done this, and he suffered greatly. He paid a big price, paid a very tough price, but he's done an incredible job, and yeah, these are all. But I will say that we're not going to be sacrificing our companies for all of the growth and everything else that they're exploding, they're doing so well, by using a fake term of national security. It's got to be real national security. And I think people are getting carried away with it. So I want our companies to be treated, I want our companies to be allowed to do business. I mean, things are put on my desk that have nothing to do with national security, including with chip makers and various others. So we're going to give it up. And what will happen? They'll make those chips in a different country, or they'll make them in China or someplace else. So national security is very important. I've been very tough on Huawei. But that doesn't mean we have to be tough on everybody that does something. We want to be able to sell all of this incredible technology. We're #1 in the world. We want to be able to sell to other countries.
Do you trust the Taliban in this ceasefire? And are you confident that peace deal can be reached in Afghanistan?
We are doing something. We've been in the war in Afghanistan now for 19 years. We've substantially reduced the force, as you know. We're really acting more as a law jam. I can't believe so quiet all the time. I saw that there's a Senator Murphy met with the Iranians. Is that a fact? I just saw that on the way over. Is there anything that I should know? Because that sounds like to be a violation of the law. We're watching Venezuela very close.
Specifically about Roger Stone, but are you ruling out pardon for Stone for your former campaign chairman Michael Flynn?
I did. I did. I had a very good conversation with President Erdogan.
If you can, find out if I need to talk to someone, or if everything's okay, all right?
Well, I don't know exactly the schedule because I don't set the schedule. Largely, largely the schedule is set by the Secret Service. We do what they want us to. And always be careful what you wish for. And I'm not wishing for anything. Whoever it is, I'll be very happy. But it seems that Bernie Sanders and that whole big section of the Democratic Party, or as I call it, the Democrat Party, which is really the correct name, it seems they're being taken advantage of like they were 4 years ago. Well, I'll be making a speech in Nevada. And I don't know how President Xi is handling the coronavirus. I think President Xi is working very hard. As you know, I spoke with him recently. He's working. You know, if it comes up, yes, but we'll see what happens with that. That's really up to Senator. grid. And he is traveling with it. Well, we can have a trade deal with India, but I'm really saving the big deal for later on. We're doing a very big trade deal with India. We'll have it. I don't know if it'll be done before the election. About 7 million people, so it's going to be very exciting. I hope you all are going. Are you going? Are you going? I hope so. Are you going, Jeff? I hope you're going. People know it's a fraud. I know who it is, and I know who some of the leakers are, but some of the leakers don't exist. It's made up by the press. So, they say 9 people have said, or 2 people have said, and those people don't exist. But no, I know all about Anonymous. I know a lot about the leakers too. We know a lot. In fact, when I want to get something out to the press, I tell certain people, and it's amazing. It gets out there. But so far, I'm leaving it that way. I'll see you later. Thank you. See you. Thank you. Down with the mic.
Okay, I think that'll do it for